Chapter 1072 The Call from Behind the Door. The contents on this mural will become reality in the physical world. Be it Klein or Leonard, they couldn't help but repeat Miss Justice's words in their hearts. If the murals on the other side determined the history of the book world, then it was only considered rather amazing. However, the discovery on this side would be enough to shake everyone's hearts and bring about a huge upheaval throughout their bodies. The pictures you depicted would definitely show up on stage in the real world, not in an illusory world. This was the performance of a deity. It's not that exaggerated, right? After Leonard repeated the statement, he whispered in a low voice, finding it hard to accept. Klein, on the other hand, started his analysis out of habit. Even if 0-08 can only affect a big city, making it difficult for it to exceed this range, a sequence one author of the spectator pathway should be similar. And the visionary's uniqueness has been confirmed to be in Adam's hands. Then what does this city of miracles rely on to guarantee that the contents on this mural will become a reality? The divine power of the dragon of imagination from back then? When this book was formed, the contents of the murals had already been branded into the sea of collective subconscious, sinking right inside and spreading its infection in every direction, so as to drive generation after generation to accomplish this without realizing it. If this is true, then the possibility of making another mural become a reality would definitely be nil, as the dragon of imagination has already perished, and there's no way to provide any more divine power. But we can give it a try. If the contents of the new mural really happens in the physical world, it means that this city of miracles really is live seed, and it contains a huge secret. It also implies that matters regarding the spectator pathway goes deeper than what I had imagined. Author? There's a potion name like that? Hearing Klein's thoughts, Leonard couldn't help but mutter. Compared to how the name Dragon of Imagination could be stretched to make an inference to the name Visionary, the potion name of Author was more eye-catching. It made one's imagination run wild. It felt more like walking from reality and into the realm of fantasy. Audrey, who had long known the name of the high-sequence potions of the spectator pathway, suddenly had another thought. Uniqueness. Mr. World actually managed to link up and analyze so many things in an instant. Impressive. Did I praise him too directly? Mr. World has heard it all. This hall is really hard to adapt to. No, Mr. World, I really am praising you. I really mean it. Audrey felt a little ashamed at first, but then she quickly adjusted her state of mind, trying her best to keep calm. As expected of a psychiatrist, she adjusted herself really quickly. A thought came to Klein's mind. As expected, Mr. World isn't as cold as he looks. He's the type of person who will inwardly mutter to himself, I didn't say anything. Just as Audrey instinctively thought of something, she immediately denied it. The same voice echoed around Leonard. Klein's Gehrman Sparrow disguise isn't bad. Almost everyone who knows him believes that he's cold and crazy. Hee, who would have thought? Just as Leonard's thoughts were about to wander, a voice interrupted him. Shut up. Looking at the way Gehrman Sparrow was dressed, he spread out his hands and held back his laughter as he said, Look, that isn't cold enough, right? Cold. Then I'll directly press the unshadowed crucifix against your head. If you don't want your Beyonder characteristic, donate it to the people who need it. Without being able to use cogitation to control his thoughts, Klein instinctively retorted. Audrey looked at Mr. World and then at Mr. Star, and her heart skipped a beat. So they have so much drama in their hearts. I could only tell that was the case for Mr. Star, but I failed to read what's under the world's poker face. Giant, boss, mini. At crucial moments like this, the experienced Audrey forcibly manipulated her thoughts to begin reciting names so as to stop her thoughts from wandering off. Who are they? Leonard's attention was diverted. They're the hounds and horses my family rears, Audrey replied politely. A hound costs £450. Klein suddenly recalled Butler Walter's suggestion of buying a batch of hunting dogs when he purchased Mager Manor. Why is the first thing on Mr. World's mind the price? This question floated into Audrey's mind. Leonard pursed his lips. Even though he didn't say a word, he answered, Isn't this normal? This fellow has always been a little picky about this, I remember. Before he could finish, Klein coughed lightly and said, We'll continue exploring the other areas, and when we have time, we'll perform experiments on the murals. Sigh, this hall really complicates matters very easily. The main point is that everyone's privacy is brought to the forefront if we aren't focused. Upon hearing the last sentence of his complaint, Audrey and Leonard couldn't help but laugh out loud, but not by their own will. Seeing that Mr. World clearly didn't want the situation to develop into chaos again, Audrey raised her head, looked up at the ceiling, and focused her attention and got down to business. The mural on the right side controls the book world, and the left seems to affect reality. What if you draw the mural on the ceiling? What would happen? Klein immediately made a connection. The Dragon of Imagination's authority contains at least 3 aspects. An envisioned kingdom will descend upon the physical world, a declared future that will happen in the real world, and imagined objects that will be conjured. The first point corresponds to the right mural, and the second point corresponds to our guesses on the left mural. Then, could the blank spot on the palace's ceiling be related to the third authority? As long as you draw an object you imagined onto the ceiling, it will be conjured and be usable? Audrey easily understood what the world meant. Then what if I were to draw a dragon of imagination? Leonard suggested. Klein glanced at him again. First of all, you would have had to have seen the dragon of imagination without completely breaking down and losing control. Secondly, you need to restore the main details of his body. Finally, you have to know how to draw. I might not know how to now, but it doesn't mean that I can't in the future. I can hire a home tutor to teach me, Leonard grumbled in reply. And what does the main details refer to? His body structure, or the symbols and labels depicted from godhood? At this moment, Audrey pursed her lips and said with a brisk tone, controlling herself so as to not burst out laughing, I can draw. This was the basic skill for a noble lady, and Audrey was quite talented in this aspect. Yeah, we can try it in the future when there's time. Klein nodded and walked towards the giant pillar right in front of the main hall. His plan for this expedition was to first gain a complete understanding of the situation before considering how to venture deeper. At the same time, he thought of something else because of Leonard's question. The symbols and labels from godhood. These contain plenty of mixed knowledge. It can even let people learn the corresponding potion formulas and beyonder powers after surviving the impact from witnessing it directly. Then, before the first blasphemy slate appeared, what would one obtain if they survived directly looking at a demigod or even an ancient god? There were no such things as potion formulas back then. Is it only through using a magic potion to advance one's mythical creature form step by step that the godhood aspect is able to contain this portion of knowledge? Or perhaps, after the potion formula appears, mythical creatures who used any method of advancement had the corresponding knowledge forged within them? If it's because of the 2 reasons I came up with, it means that the knowledge of godhood can change and it can increase. Do angels of the Marauder pathway have the ability to alter such knowledge or even delete them directly? Mr. World's considerations are so deep and profound. They involve very high levels. Audrey couldn't help but sigh. Leonard couldn't control the voice in his heart either. There's such a thing. I should ask old man when I return. This fellow sure knows a lot. It's not entirely a pretense when he's acting as Gairman Sparrow. At least this sense of profoundness seems to belong to him. Thank you for your praise. Stop. With a small blood bottle in one hand and the unshadowed crucifix in the other, Klein forced himself to rein in his thoughts and cast his gaze at the ancient god's throne. They were in their spirit body forms now. Although they were unable to fly due to the restrictions from the main hall, their top speed was still much faster than their human form. It was only then that Klein realized that, behind the pillar that looked like the Dragon of Imagination's throne, there was a dark tunnel. I can't see anything. If only there was light. A thought subconsciously flashed through Audrey's mind. Then in that tunnel, a pure and soft light shone out, illuminating the inside of the tunnel completely. Without needing to enter, Klein, Leonard, and Audrey saw a pair of double bronze doors at the deepest end of the tunnel. There were countless indescribable symbols covering the door, like countless chains that extended behind them, as if they were sealing something. It gave off a heavy and mysterious feeling. In the city of miracles of the dragons, in the residence of an ancient god, there was apparently a sealed door behind his throne. Almost at the same time, the 3 of them seemed to look through the bronze door and into the darkness inside. Following that, they heard the loud thumping of hearts. It was from their own heartbeats. Yet they were in their spirit body states now, so there was no such thing as a heart. After that, the bronze-green color on the surface of the unshadowed crucifix slowly peeled off, revealing a corporeal body formed from pure light that emitted a sun-like glow. As for Klein, Audrey, and Leonard, they felt a baffling sense of coldness. It was as if every cell had their own sentience and wanted to form another self. In their illusory vision, in the darkness behind the bronze door, an eye opened. Its pupil was dark, filled with ghostly blue cracks. One after another, similar-looking eyes opened too. They were densely packed together and wore a cold gaze that stared intently at them. At this moment, Klein and the others seemed to hear a silent calling. It was an extremely attractive shout. Without any hesitation, Klein's spirit body burgeoned and enveloped Leonard and Audrey. He ended the summoning and returned above the gray fog. Chapter 1073 3 Possibilities. As he returned to the world above the gray fog, Klein felt the coldness in his body rapidly dissipate. There were no more worms of spirit trying to give birth to new consciousnesses. A moment later, the mottled long bronze table appeared in front of him. He saw that Miss Justice and Leonard's spirit bodies were gradually becoming clearer amidst the thin gray fog, although they still maintained a certain blurriness to them. After the gray fog swirled around them and sank into the ground, Klein asked, "How are you feeling now?" He used Gehrman Sparrow's usual tone, but he immediately recalled how his inner grumblings, inner thoughts, habitual analysis, and him dissing Leonard had been exposed. He was no longer able to maintain his image in front of Miss Justice. "It's all Leonard's fault. Sigh, as per the doctor's advice, not only did I not wear a thick mask this time, but I even removed the thin kind." This thought flashed in his mind unconsciously as he cut off his thoughts and warily glanced around. He still hadn't gotten rid of the fear of having his thoughts spoken out loud. Luckily, this was no longer the place that he had named the Hall of Truth. There were no more magical powers that he couldn't defend again via normal means. It was obvious that Audrey and Leonard also had a similar trauma due to their post-traumatic stress. One of them suddenly pursed her lips, while the other sat up straight, as though they had instinctively thought of something. After a few seconds of silence, they then remembered that the world had asked about their situation, so they quickly turned their attention back on the right track. "I feel like something was being purified. I had the illusion that I would dissociate into a second personality." No, it wasn't a second personality. It seemed like a consciousness that didn't belong to me was awakening inside my body. "Yes, it's now gone. Praise be to Mr. Fool." Audrey rather professionally did a psychoanalysis on herself before sincerely expressing her gratitude. "I can openly accept such gratitude." That was a dangerous thought. Thankfully, Miss Justice's and Leonard's thoughts didn't steer towards the Fool while inside the Hall of Truth. Otherwise, I'd definitely not be able to resist the urge to reply. That'd spell the end of me. My sense of shame will cause me to lose control on the spot, breaking down into a clump of worms of spirit. Klein's thought flashed as he seriously replied, "Praise be to Mr. Fool. Praise be to Mr. Fool." As a believer of the Evernight goddess, Leonard hesitantly echoed and quickly changed the topic. "There's nothing wrong with me too. Just now, I felt something calling me from behind the bronze door. What about you?" Seeing that Leonard had confirmed his condition, Klein placed the unshadowed crucifix and the metal bottle containing his blood onto the long mottled table in front of him. "I felt the same way too," he answered with certainty. "Me too. It wasn't an illusion. I did an analysis on my own mind," Audrey said in a very clear and certain tone. Leonard held his chin and said, "What could that be?" It actually needed an ancient god to seal it behind his throne. After what had happened before, he felt that he no longer had much of an image in front of Miss Justice, so his posture became more casual. "We can try analyzing this." Audrey carefully glanced at the world. She had a deep impression of this gentleman's ability to gather information, make connections, complete an analysis, and infer the information in a short period of time. Klein thought for a moment and said without any inclinations, "There are only 3 possibilities. 1. It's a powerful creature from the second epoch of the real world. It's at least close to sequence 0, and the Dragon of Imagination Ankwelt had sealed it behind his throne and beneath the City of Miracles live seed. However, I don't think that's very likely. This is because that ancient god definitely had his reasons for creating this book and stuffing live seed into it while affecting the book world and the real world. It's unlikely he would place an unpredictable element in here for prolonged periods of time. Yeah, we all know that we have to eliminate possible accidents. What's more, an ancient god." Audrey nodded slightly and began to discuss seriously with the world Gehrman. At this moment, Leonard chuckled and said, "Perhaps an ancient god like the Dragon of Imagination had seen certain scenes of the distant future and believes that the sealed item will help him achieve his goals? That's why I said that it's not impossible, but it's highly improbable," Klein replied calmly. "The second possibility is that the sealed item is key to the Dragon of Imagination Ankwelt's ploy. Once this book and 0-08 meet, the seal will be released and that object will return to the real world and bring about certain changes. I believe that this theory has the highest possibility. Amongst them, perhaps it also involves the Dragon of Wisdom's true attitude or intent." Then what could it be? Mr. Fool once said that, after Adam obtained 0-08, he is even closer to being divine. The times have changed as a result. Does this mean that Adam has gathered all the ingredients for visionary and is just short of the ritual? Is there anything wrong with my understanding? Audrey shared her point of view. I'm not sure either. I'll pray to Mr. Fool and see if I can get a clearer revelation. Klein didn't want to give a firm answer. Unfortunately, Old Man is an angel from the fourth epoch and doesn't know much about the second epoch, but he isn't unfamiliar with Adam. The star Leonard thoughtfully said, I'll try. He wanted to say that he would try investigating, but upon recalling that the two knew his secret, he gave up such thoughts and directly said, try asking Old Man. Sorry to trouble you, Audrey sincerely thanked him. From her point of view, this was a matter regarding the spectator pathway. The person most concerned about this was undoubtedly herself, while others were merely providing help. Then she said, the third possibility is that there is some sort of object or monster sealed inside the book world? Yes, it might be closely related to the book world, and destroying it might cause the book world to collapse. Therefore, all Ankwelt did was seal it. Klein shared his theory. Audrey thought for a while before saying, I have an idea regarding this possibility. Seeing Mr. World and Mr. Star cast their gazes over, awaiting an answer, she slowed down her pace and said, I'm considering it from a psychological perspective. Since that book world was created by Ankwelt's envisioning it, the sea of collective subconscious there would definitely be formed as a result of him. It would have his psyche, emotions, and feelings branded into it. Perhaps the City of Miracles, Live Seed, seals the most extreme parts of these things. They're the trauma or fears of the dragon of imagination. Some terrifying matters from his one consciousness might be projected onto this brand. As long as heat cannot defeat them, and if it hasn't been dealt with in the real world, the book world sea of collective subconscious cannot be destroyed and can only be sealed. If it's ignored, they will slowly contaminate the sea of collective subconscious and make the development of history deviate from its intended path. Leonard was more focused than when he attended Red Gloves meetings. He couldn't help but mention when he had heard that, as an ancient god that ruled the sky and the mind, what could have left an irremovable trauma and create such an intense sense of fear? I don't know. Audrey shook her head frankly. If it's just a psychological analysis, since it's sealed under the throne and at the bottom of the City of Miracles, and is reached by a tunnel, it means that the source of the trauma and fear comes from underground. Therefore, the dragon of imagination sealed it. No. He isolated the mental projection coming from underground. Otherwise, why wouldn't it be beside the throne, in the depths of the hole, in a specially created jail, or somewhere else? Upon hearing Miss Justice's words, Klein instantly thought of what had happened to Miss Magician and Miss Judgment. According to the information provided by the Sanguine, they found an ancient castle of unknown age. At the bottom of the castle was a bronze door that seemed to seal something terrifying that came from underground. Once they approached the door or stayed in its vicinity for too long, they would be corrupted, dying a tragic death. It was an ancient castle that was built to defend against something unknown. It was originally guarded by humans from an unknown era. After the Sanguine discovered it, no one dared to enter. Back then, I thought that it might be related to devils and that one needed to be a demigod in order to explore it. Could this be related to the seal in Live Seed? Klein's thoughts wandered as he quickly found the relevant information from his memories. On the way to the ruins of the Battle of the Gods on Katlia's future, he met a so-called deep-sea well. At that time, the future sailor Nina had dived to the bottom of the sea and did a series of investigations. She said that it wasn't a giant well. It was deep and dark, impossible for a human child to enter. The bottom couldn't be seen, and there were strange honeycombed signs of corrosion along the inner walls. Surrounding it were collapsed iron buildings. In a sense, this is also a tunnel that goes deep underground. Klein looked around and deliberated before saying, Do you remember the matter Miss Magician mentioned? Under an abandoned castle in Delaire Forest, there is a pair of doors that seals a powerful corruptive force. Ah, right. Audrey instantly recalled the past. Could it be that in the early days of the Second Epoch, in that ancient era, supernatural beings had some common terrifying enemy that came from underground? Perhaps. Klein couldn't give an affirmative answer, so he took the opportunity to say, it might also be like the many predictions of the apocalypse which state that the danger comes from the cosmos. Yeah. Audrey and Leonard didn't know much about such matters, so they couldn't discuss this matter too deeply. Let's end it here for today. After we have a preliminary understanding of the situation, We will try to experiment on the murals. Also, remember to keep this a secret. Klein shot a look at Leonard and said, "Oh, after you return, pray to Mr. Fool and request that he be the witness to our vows to not divulge each other's secrets." Audrey didn't object and added, "I'll use hypnosis here to forget certain matters here to prevent myself from remembering it when I return." Chapter 1074 The answer to questions. After Audrey and Leonard left the grey fog, Klein didn't immediately return to the real world. He was still sitting on the high-backed chair that belonged to the world, silent for more than 10 seconds. Then, he beckoned for an item. It was a heart that was the size of a child's fist, one that full of grayish-white wrinkles. A manipulator's Beyonder characteristic. Holding the Beyonder characteristic, Klein stood up and walked out of the majestic palace. He entered the depths of the mysterious space above the grey fog and arrived at the staircase of light that seemed to lead to a divine kingdom. Walking along the stairs, he walked up to the floating grayish-white clouds and stood in front of the strange door of light and the hanging transparent cocoons. Klein raised his right hand, lifting the brain-like, heart-like manipulator Beyonder characteristic to his chest and extended his spirituality, hoping to use it. He wanted to see if there were still any subconscious thoughts in the people inside the cocoons. He wanted to see if they had put together a miniature sea of collective subconscious. If that happened, he planned to use Vin Rambise's manipulator Beyonder characteristic to enter the consciousness and check on the psyche branding to figure out what the people who had been hanging above the door of light had experienced before their transmigration. He wanted to know if they sensed anything during that long slumber. This was the inspiration that the expedition today gave him. Of course, the Beyonder characteristic left behind by Vin Rambis might not be able to help Klein do what he wanted. It was because it hadn't been made into a mystical item, and it was very difficult to use effectively. In an instant, the grayish-white and wrinkled heart in Klein's hand started to beat slowly as it emitted thumping sounds. Klein then heard the synchronized heartbeats among the transparent cocoons. Thump, thump. This meant that the people inside were still alive, only in a certain state of slumber. In Klein's vision, their figures gradually evolved into several blurry islands beneath them. This represented their consciousness. However, these spiritual islands were also trapped within transparent cocoons, separating them from the prying eyes of the outside world. Similarly, they were unable to integrate and create a sea of collective subconscious. Unless the cocoon is destroyed, there's no way to bypass them and enter the corresponding mind world. Klein muttered to himself and lowered the hand holding the manipulator Beyonder characteristic. After a few seconds, he sighed deeply and turned around to leave. In Empress Borough, the opulent villa of Earl Hall. With a silk blanket over her, Audrey, who was sleeping soundly with her eyes closed, suddenly opened her eyes. She then sat up, moved to the side of the bed, and prayed sincerely to Mr. Fool, asking him to witness her vow to secrecy. After she was done with this matter, she pulled a pillow over and placed it behind her waist, reminiscing over the experiences that she had yet to forget during the exploration. The history of ancient times is really interesting and terrifying. Mr. Star's performance is similar to my usual observations of him. He's more carefree and casual, and his thoughts easily wander in an uncontrollable manner. Yet, there are matters where he shows his experience and acuity. He's rather reliable. This isn't a contradiction, as many people have such mixed layers to themselves. Mr. World is indeed a gentle person. He doesn't seem to wear much of an expression on his face, but he's secretly inwardly muttering something to himself all the time. His mental conversations with Mr. Star can practically be adapted into a play. People call him a crazy adventurer who doesn't care about his surroundings, one that directly draws his gun to shoot when he sees a target. Well, at the last moment, I thought he would attempt to approach the bronze door, but in the end, he fled. No, he broke away so decisively. Audrey's lips slowly curled up when she thought of this. Then she made a conclusion. The facts have proven that, in the mysterious world, unless one has completely lost all sense of rationality or has given up on thinking, there will not be any Beyonders who will really do crazy things. One has to be careful and cautious, not seeing things that shouldn't be seen, and not hear things that shouldn't be heard. Audrey, you must remember this. 7 Pinster Street. Leonard returned to his body. He quickly thought of how he should talk to Pallas Zoroast before pretending like nothing had happened and saying in a deep voice, "Old man, I have something to ask you." In his mind, Pallas' slightly aged voice immediately laughed. "You have to remember this. The more you ask, the more I can guess what you did tonight. It's not like there's anything that needs to be kept a secret. Leonard replied habitually before getting down to the main issue. Old man, what do you know about the Amon's brother? That depends on what you want to know. Palaz Zoros tossed the question back at Leonard. Leonard thought for a moment and said, after Amon's brother obtained 0-08, is he only short of the ritual to become a god? Probably. Palaz didn't give an affirmative answer. Leonard wasn't too satisfied with this answer. Instead, he said, I remember you mentioning it once. In the early stages of the Solomon Empire, the two kings of angels, Medici and Ouroboros, were quite scared of Amon and his brother. This means that they were already very close to being divine. This was something that Palaz had occasionally mentioned during their previous exchanges. This time, Leonard had confirmed it from some of Mobit's answers. I've only said the first half of the sentence. I didn't tell you that Amon and Adam are very close to being divine. Palaz rejected Leonard's claim. There are too many possibilities as to why Medici and Ouroboros are afraid. It's not just because he is close to being divine. It's not enough to make such a conclusion based on that. The sequence one angel cleared his throat and continued. Them being close to being divine is one of the possibilities. Adam and Amon wield unique authorities, and them being hard to deal with is another possibility. For instance, you will always have no idea that Adam is sitting beside you. You have no idea if what you're doing was arranged by him, nor do you know that you're walking into his trap by your own volition. I'm referring to you, not me. Of course, I also have to be aware of such matters. Letting my guard down might result in terrible consequences for me too. As for Amon, he has many different ideas and has a do-it spirit, making it hard for people to guess his motives and be on guard against him. Besides, he is very good at deceit. There's always some conspiracy behind him. In that era, apart from the true deities, there was no one who wasn't afraid of him. Even true deities had to be wary of him. Otherwise, they might have certain authorities stolen by him at some point in time. Leonard nodded indecently and diverted the topic. Old man, do you think the spectator pathway is hiding any secrets? I don't think there are any secrets below the level of angel. I'm not sure of anything above it. Palaz said after pondering for a few seconds. Without waiting for Leonard to respond, he hesitantly added, I heard from Medici that high-level beyonders of the spectator pathway are the hardest to lose control or go crazy. But it's also the easiest to lose control and go crazy. Why? Leonard asked in surprise. Palaz Zoroast scoffed and said, I have some guesses, but I lack the necessary evidence and logic behind them. I don't want to tell you for the time being. You actually don't have any ideas or theories, right? Leonard habitually grumbled. Don't try your little tricks in front of me. The slightly aged voice wasn't affected at all. Leonard didn't dare to ask further as he deliberated for a moment before saying, Old man, I went to a real dream this time. There were quite a lot of Xueqi remnants of people from ancient times in it. Do you know a viscount named Mobit Zoroast? Mobit. Palaz's voice suddenly aged significantly before returning to normal. He's a direct descendant of my bloodline. He vanished after a large-scale war, and I thought that he had been killed by Amon or Jacob in passing, causing me to fail to divine the murderer. From the looks of it, things weren't that simple. Indeed. Leonard gave an affirmative answer. Then, he briefly provided the gist of things. He's been dead for some time, leaving some of his Xueqi behind. In that real dream, he married a songster from the elves. After listening quietly, Palaz said after a while, That's good too. Leonard had originally wanted to mention that Mobit also addressed Palaz as old man, but he suddenly couldn't bring himself to. He had no choice but to end the conversation there. After witnessing Leonard's and Audrey's vow, Klein returned to the real world. He tidied up the altar in the room, took out a pen and paper, and drew a complicated symbol that was a mixture of concealment and mystery prying. He wanted to summon a Rhodes to ask how it had confirmed that Grozel's travels had appeared after the disappearance of the City of Miracles, Liveseed. After waiting for more than 10 seconds, the full-body mirror in the room lit up with a faint aqueous light. Silver words appeared one after another in the dim light. Exalted, benevolent, great master, your puny, loyal and humble servant, a Rhodes, is here to answer your summoning. Do you have any orders for me? Some questions. After giving his answer, Klein was in no hurry to ask about the matter regarding Grozel's travels, intending to start with something that wasn't very sensitive first. He thought and said, a Rhodes, there's an abandoned castle in Delaire Forest. In the depths of it is a pair of bronze doors. It seems to be sealing some power coming from underground. Do you know what it is? The moment he finished speaking, the light on the full-body mirror surface suddenly dimmed and turned pitch black. In the pitch blackness, white, liquefied words appeared one after another. I came from underground. Chapter 1075. No response. I came from underground. Looking at the ghastly white words that appeared on the full-body mirror, a chill suddenly ran down Klein's back. His pupils dilated as he instinctively wanted to switch places with his marionette next door. In the room where the valet was, Enuni, who was lying quietly, had opened his eyes. His stomach began to expand and contract as though he had a second heart, one that beat extremely slowly. At the same time, the scene of the magic mirror arose, answering where it came from flashed through Klein's mind. Large amounts of black sticky liquid spewed out from an underground hole, writhing and expanding. An uneven number of hands and legs that turned into numerous monsters grew out. During this process, a speck of light was shot out along with the black liquid before landing on a rock, to which it rapidly fused together, turning into a mirror with ancient patterns and black gems adorning its two sides, a Rhodes's main form. It really came from underground. And this underground is the same as the underground area sealed by the bronze door inside the ancient abandoned castle. I didn't make the connection before. It's not like I could help it. There are just too many things that involve things from underground. Most of them have little special meaning, just like coal. A few days ago, I didn't think that there was anything overly special with the underground. Klein controlled the urge within him and ignored the shock from Rhodes's answer, and he said with an unperturbed expression, "What's the exact situation?" The ghastly pale words changed and gave off a baffling feeling, as though it was almost crying. "Great Master, I'm not exactly sure what happened. I only came to the surface and became a mirror before I gained true sentience. I don't remember anything from before. Oh yeah, there's something that might be related. Do you want to hear it?" "Speak." Seeing that Rhodes's attitude was still all right, Klein heaved a sigh of relief. The color of the words on the full-body mirror surface had slightly recovered, and it became somewhat pure white. "Didn't I say it before? I see support and dominance from you, and other than that special calling, I have similar feelings towards the underground. It makes me feel warm and makes me want to return to submit myself. This might be why I became your servant." "What? The things from underground give people the same feeling as the gray fog? They all involve support and dominance?" Upon seeing Rhodes's answer, Klein jumped in fright once again. If not for his clown's ability, he would have lost his composure. At that moment, he suddenly recalled a Chinese joke he had seen in his previous life and substituted himself into it. What? The things that the ancient gods fear come from underground? What? Rhodes also comes from underground? What? I also come from underground. This is really funny and scary. No, this might not be a joke. The original owner of the mysterious space above the gray fog, the creator of that strange door of light, the existence that pulled all the transmigrators over, might be related to the underground, or he has all kinds of connections with it. Klein's thoughts wandered as he instantly thought of many matters. As an indescribable shadow loomed over him, he smiled and mocked himself. No matter what, there are new clues and directions for the investigation into the gray fog and transmigration. Klein composed himself and asked in deliberation, "What do the churches and secret organizations know about the underground objects that require sealing?" On the full-length mirror, the white words returned to its silver color. "It's almost unheard of. It seems to be concealed by some sort of power." "Isn't that concealment?" Klein frowned slightly and didn't say a word. The silver words on the mirror continued to appear. However, there are some legends that exist within a group of secret organizations. According to the legends, the underground is described as the lair of devils and evil spirits, the source of humanity's decadence, the primordial sins and evil. The first one is wrong. The underground object that needs to be sealed has a high chance of having nothing to do with devils or evil spirits. Legends are actually similar to the mysterious symbols. Don't look at what is said, but peel off its outer skin and figure out what it symbolizes. This symbolizes the fear of the underground, from the body to the spirit, from one's consciousness to one's feelings. Klein's thoughts raced as he said with a nod, "It's your turn to ask a question. Great Master, your loyal servant, Rhodes, has a small suggestion. Do you want to hear it?" Silver words appeared on the full-body mirror one after another. "Speak." Klein could vaguely guess what Rhodes was suggesting. Before you return to being divine, try not to investigate anything related to being sealed underground. The silver words quickly squirmed, reforming into a new sentence. "As expected." Klein sighed and calmly said, "Next question. How did you confirm that Grozel's travels appeared after the disappearance of the City of Miracles, live seed?" The words on the surface of the mirror quickly distorted, merging into a clump, and then quickly dispersing. "It's a revelation and information obtained from the spirit world. Since it originated from the dragon's subsidiary god, the Dragon of Wisdom, your loyal servant believes that it can be confirmed." "Great Master. Is there a problem with that?" "How direct?" After sighing, Klein instantly thought of how the Dragon of Wisdom, Harabergen, should have entered the book world before and approached the bronze door behind the ancient god's throne, likely having some knowledge of what was sealed underground due to his omniscience. Furthermore, Klein believed that the ancient dragon had hidden a deeper layer of secrets in Grozel's travels. He could vaguely grasp it, but he couldn't tell what it was and grasp at it. "No," Klein answered Rhodes's question. Then he probed. "Why didn't you mention the Dragon of Wisdom's true name?" "It's because I don't dare to directly give the name of a god." Rhodes gave a confirmed answer in a tacit manner. Klein nodded and didn't ask further. "It's your turn." "Great Master. Do you have any more questions?" The silver word rapidly reorganized itself on the slightly dark mirror. "No, that's all for today." Klein shook his head. With that said, he remembered what had happened the previous time and added, "I'll summon you again when there are new questions." The full-body mirror immediately brightened, and the silver word sparkled. "Yes, Master. Your loyal and strong servant, Rhodes, is waiting for you to call again." This time, it wasn't a simple drawing but a white cat's paw with a red center. "There's always something new." The corner of Klein's mouth twitched slightly as he watched the full-body mirror the bedroom return to normal. He stood in the darkness, bathed in the crimson moonlight shining through the curtains. After standing quietly for a while, he returned to his bed and quickly fell asleep with the help of cogitation. The next morning, on Monday morning, Klein woke up 15 minutes earlier than usual. He led his valet, Anuni, down to the first floor and said to butler Walter, "I had a nightmare last night. I want to visit the cathedral before breakfast." Although butler Walter was surprised by this, it wasn't too strange. After all, as long as the cathedral's doors were open, people could enter at any time. He quickly arranged for a carriage and sent Dwayne Dantes all the way to the door. When Klein arrived at St. Samuel Cathedral, the door wasn't opened yet. He waited until 8 before entering the main hall with the first batch of believers. He found a seat in the first few pews and sat down facing the dark sacred emblem. Closing his eyes in the tranquil environment, he focused on chanting the goddess's honorific name in ancient Hermes. "The Eve-mite goddess who stand higher than the cosmos and more eternal than eternity. You are also the Lady of Crimson, the Mother of Concealment, the Empress of Misfortune and Horror, Mistress of Repose and Silence." After he finished reciting the honorific name, he changed to his normal lone language and said almost soundlessly, "There's an ancient castle in the middle of Delaire Forest. There's an ancient bronze door deep within it. It's sealing a powerful corruptive force. How should I eliminate this latent problem there?" This wasn't a test of a deity, but an open report. As for what reaction the church would have after that, and what they would see through their operations, was a whole other matter. After repeating it 7 times, he began to pray seriously. Time passed. In the quiet and peaceful church, Klein stood up and walked out of St. Samuel Cathedral with his valet, Anuni. During this process, he didn't receive any revelations, nor did he see the matron of the Evernight cloister, Ariana. The feedback itself meant something. That was he wasn't qualified to know about the underground seal. East Borough. In a 2-bedroom apartment. Furs pulled up the blanket and covered her head. She abhorred the curtains here because they were too thin and translucent and couldn't block out the morning sun. That seriously affected her quality of sleep. "I have to change it." "No, we might have to move again soon." Just as Furz's thoughts wandered about, she heard the sound of the bedroom door opening and Zio's familiar gate. In a flash, her blanket disappeared and a letter landed on her. "Your letter from Pritz Haba," Zio informed her. "Teacher's reply." Furz sat up suddenly, opened the letter, and quickly read it. After a moment of silence she said, "I have to go out for a while. My teacher has already reached Backlund. This letter should have arrived 2 days ago." The letter had a date and address. "The postman over here isn't that responsible." Zio glanced at her friend and said, "Will you be late?" "Fortunately, teacher said that he would wait 3 days for me." Furz hurriedly got off the bed and started changing her clothes. She had a feeling that she would be able to understand the Abraham family more deeply this time, and also receive the potion formula of Traveler and some Beyonder ingredients. Chapter 1076 Dorian's Request Outside Room 2016 at the Hat Trick Inn on Sherwood Burrows 22 Hope Street. Furs directly walked through the wall without drawing anyone's attention. Then, she knocked on the door in a rhythm that was previously agreed upon. Not long after, Dorian Gray Abraham, who was dressed in black, with his broad shoulders and thick arms, unlocked the door and turned the doorknob. The gentleman quickly sized up the area and made way for Furs to enter the room. "I really didn't expect you to become a scribe so soon." After closing the door, Dorian carefully examined the door's lock before turning around and sighing. Based on the standards of this era, he was considered a middle-aged man, but he was still a Sequence 7 astrologer. He had no hope of advancing yet. His student, Furs Wall, took about a year to go from Sequence 9 to Sequence 6. This comparison between the two made Dorian feel poignant and sad. The Abraham family's bloodline should have been noble and enviable, but now, it was a heavy curse that made him depressed. "It's because you taught me well." Although Furs didn't like going out and enjoyed staying at home, she would still be invited by the nobles from time to time. She was a best-selling author who participated in high society's literary salons, so she wasn't clueless as to how to speak. Furthermore, she had indeed obtained quite a bit of help from her teacher, from providing knowledge and money to formulas and ingredients. Dorian looked at her and shook his head with a smile. "It's not like you're my only student. As far as I remember, this advancement speed can only be matched by one person." He paused and continued. "Next up, your target is Sequence 5 Traveler. And I have even higher expectations for you. I hope that you can obtain godhood and become a Sequence 4 secret sorcerer. Of course, I also have a request. When you truly become a demigod, try to pray to a hidden existence and listen to his answer to figure out what he is talking about. This is indeed a bit dangerous, but a Sequence 4 demigod would have sufficient power to withstand it. Without any other elements at play, there shouldn't be any problems." "Teacher, is this answer important to you?" Although Furs knew what was going on, she still acted curious and puzzled. Dorian fell silent for a few seconds before sighing. "It's very important. My parents, my brothers, my sisters, my children, too many people have sacrificed their lives in pursuit of this answer, but to no avail. Don't worry. We paid such a huge price because there's an ancient curse on our family's bloodline, and you aren't related to us by blood. I don't expect to find a way to break the curse through that answer during my generation. However, I hope to know where it originates from and understand the cause of my death." Upon saying this, Dorian took a deep breath and didn't continue. For some reason, Furs could feel the weight of time that had accumulated over 1,000 years, generation after generation, bearing down on her shoulders. She really couldn't imagine how painful it would be for a person's ancestors, parents, brothers, sisters, and children to directly or indirectly die from the same curse. Thinking of how well her teacher had been taking care of her, Furs, who had only received this type of care from her elders, opened her eyes, lowered her head, and nodded. "I'll try my best." Dorian held back his feelings and nodded slightly. "The most praiseworthy trait of yours is your kindness." Furs felt a little embarrassed as she turned to talk about a phrase the teacher had mentioned. Family? She remembered that her teacher had never told her about the Abraham family. He had claimed that he, Lawrence, and Elisa were members of a secret organization. In order to differentiate between matters which her teacher had told her and what she had learned at the Tarot Club, Furs had done a serious list of what she should know before she left home, to prevent herself from accidentally revealing information she shouldn't have. Dorian answered simply, "In order to solve the curse, everyone in my family joined that organization." He immediately changed the subject. "Why did you move out in a hurry this time?" "I was targeted by official Beyonders." Furs first said a half-truth before complaining a little about the mailman. Dorian didn't say anything else as he stepped away from Furs and set up a ritual. He summoned the music-loving void creature, Malmouth, and he made it spit out 3 items. One was a transparent, nearly illusory crystal, and the second item was a piece of ancient goatskin parchment. The third was a small hunter's backpack. This is a Beyonder characteristic left behind by a traveler. With it, you don't need to gather any additional main ingredients. This is the Traveler Potion formula. This backpack contains the corresponding supplementary ingredients. If you don't have a good way to preserve them, try your best to finish digesting the scribe potion within half a year. Otherwise, their spirituality will be completely lost. Dorian handed everything over to Furs. "Thank you, teacher," Furs said sincerely. Then, she unfurled the goatskin and quickly skimmed through the potion formula before placing her focus on the ritual. Set up special coordinates in 4 completely different spots deep in the spirit world, which are all set up extremely far away from each other. The goal of this ritual is? Furs thought for a few seconds and asked her teacher. After consuming the traveler potion, you will wander the spirit world chaotically. When you grasp some degree of initial level over your powers, you will realize that you have lost your way. At that moment, you can use the 4 special coordinates to return to the real world. Otherwise, you will be trapped in the depths of the spirit world for a long time. Not only is it dangerous inside, but it will also assimilate you, making you lose your mind and become a living creature that is attached to the spirit world. Although Dorian had no hope of becoming a traveler, he had seen students advancing to sequence 5 before. Then there should be another alternative, Furs muttered in thought. Yes. Dorian nodded and said, previously, there was something in the organization that could allow people to instantly return to the real world from the spirit world. Unfortunately, it was lost. Without waiting for Furs to ask, Dorian said, if you really become a demigod and fulfill my wish, I'll hand over an important item that I'm in charge of to you. This is an expectation your teacher has for you. One of the powerful sealed artifacts of the Abraham family? Furs had a vague guess, but she didn't dare promise anything. She said the same thing, I'll try my best. Following that, she asked curiously, Teacher, you mentioned that sequence 4 is a secret sorcerer. What about sequence 3, 2, and sequence 1? Dorian immediately laughed. You're only a sequence 6. Yes, sequence 3's name is Wanderer. Sequence 2 is Planeswalker. And the sequence 1 potion name is Key of Stars. Haha, it's a good thing that you mentioned this. I actually forgot to organize a list of things to take note of in the spirit world. These are things that must be remembered after becoming a traveler. In that case, I'll stay for another night. You can visit me tomorrow for the documents. As Furs ruminated over the names of the high sequence potions of the apprentice pathway, she agreed. All right, teacher. After settling these matters, Dorian paced back and forth and thought for a moment before instructing. The beyonder characteristics of the same pathway have a certain attraction towards each other. It's not obvious when one's at a low sequence, but the higher the sequence, the stronger it becomes. Sometimes, this kind of attraction isn't something you can directly feel, while also making you unknowingly approach a high sequence beyonder of the same pathway. When you become a traveler, you have to pay attention to this matter. At this point, Dorian paused and said, not many demigods of the apprentice pathway are still alive. Among them, you need to be extra careful of a man named Botes. He is the saint of secrets from the Aurora Order and, just like Lewis, he's a traitor of our organization. I will give you his portrait tomorrow. Botes. Furs repeated the name her teacher had mentioned in her mind. At the same time, she had a new understanding about the Aurora Order Oracle, Louis Veen, over the previous chance encounter. Perhaps it wasn't a chance encounter, but the attraction force between beyonder characteristics. Teacher had a sufficiently powerful sealed artifact from the apprentice pathway on him. Furs quickly suppressed this thought and began asking for advice on how to act as a scribe. In the Berg household in the City of Silver, there's actually a path that can bypass the front of the giant king's court and enter the interior from the waning forest and barren tunnel. Derek Berg recalled the information he had been shared by Mr. World above the gray fog. This was very important to the City of Silver, as the early-stage explorations after the afternoon town camp had set off implied that the closer they were to the giant king's court, the stronger the monsters that originated from the darkness were. I have to tell the chief. Derek abruptly stood up and rushed out of his house, heading straight for the spire. As he wished, he saw the chief of the 6-member council, Colin Iliad. He followed Mr. Hangman's instructions and said that he had recalled some murals he had seen in the afternoon town's shadow. On it was a secret passage that led into the giant king's court. Colin Iliad listened quietly without interrupting Derek's narration. Finally, he nodded gently and said, Good, you did well. What do you want to exchange for this contribution? A mature mind dragon's complete brain. Derek was prepared. Colin didn't ask why as he thought for a moment and said, If that secret passage is real, then the value will definitely exceed the complete brain of an adult mind dragon. You can pick something else. Are you interested in the potion formula for a relatively higher sequence of the Planta pathway? This is a question for Mr. Fool. While Derek was enlightened, he said in surprise, Do we have a relatively higher sequence potion formula for the Plantar pathway? He had no recollection of it. Of course. You should remember that the giant king's queen is the goddess of harvest, but the surrounding areas lack the corresponding beyonder ingredients. There's no rush. You can think about it again. Colin Iliad calmly changed the subject. Are you skilled with your Priest of Light powers? Yes, Derek replied succinctly. Colin was silent for a moment as he looked at the adolescent child before him and said, "What kind of saint-level sealed artifact do you want to choose?" Chapter 1077 4 Choices. What kind of saint-level sealed artifact do I want to choose? Derek Berg subconsciously considered what he needed. Due to the fact that the sun pathway was rather powerful against the monsters in the darkness, and with Thunder God's roar, he didn't have the desire for sealed artifacts that provided offensive or supportive effects. Instead, the pain from being beaten up while making friends made him subconsciously hope to obtain a mystical item that could provide stronger defensive capabilities. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Derek suddenly realized that the question wasn't directed at the saint-level sealed artifact he wanted, but which saint-level sealed artifact could be used to exchange for the Creator's cross from Mr. Fool. He hesitated and frankly asked, "Your Excellency, do you have any suggestions?" Colin glanced at him and left his original position. He slowly walked to the window and turned around. There are 4 sealed artifacts that are relatively suitable for you. The first item is called Sword of Silver Dawn. It was left behind by an elder who died 1300 years ago. With this sword in hand, one can hide their malicious intent and certain actions, effectively interfering with divination and prophecy. They would obtain an exaggerated amount of strength and bring to their surroundings a dawn that can resist evil and degeneration. It can also stir up a powerful destructive hurricane of light. It can create an invisible and sturdy defensive wall around the wielder. Every time it connects to the land, its defensive strength will be unshakable. At the tip of the hilt is a single-eyed, huge-mouthed head engraving with living characteristics. Feeding the corresponding herbs, essential oils, and medicine to this engraving will give the Sword of Silver Dawn different effects. For example, lightning strike, freeze, purification, decay, and exorcism. This sword has strict requirements for its usage. It's impossible to lift up if one isn't at least 180 centimeters tall. Below 200 centimeters, it will be hard to unleash its full strength. In addition, the head engraving at the hilt is very fond of talking. It's always talking non-stop. If the wielder doesn't respond, the Sword of Silver Dawn might suddenly give up resisting at a critical moment and even attack its owner. If the wielder is willing to converse with the head engraving, they will be pushed to the edge of madness. This is what I want, a sealed artifact that's good at defense, Derek muttered to himself. He didn't interrupt the chief's explanation as he quietly listened to him introduce the other sealed artifacts. The second is Twilight Mask. This is from the first chief. It's a mask made from a skull. It can hide any malicious intent, thoughts, and inclinations. It makes the wearer feel like a dead person without any thoughts. As long as one puts on this mask, one will possess the power of a real giant and have control over the undead. Any living creature that looks directly into the eyes of the wearer will immediately die. Even those that possess godhood will be seriously injured. And even without any direct eye contact, the target of the wearer will slowly wither away as if they were floating across a river of death. The person wearing this mask can also create a terrifying twilight storm. Any item stained with the dim light will disintegrate, rot, wither, and die, losing the vibrancy of life. Most of the attacks, aside from purification, are ineffective against the wearer of Twilight Mask, as though no one can kill a dead person. This Twilight Mask is extremely powerful, but it's extremely dangerous. Even if it's not doing anything, the people around it would suddenly die one after another for no reason. Therefore, it must have a proper sealing method. No matter who it is, once you put on this mask, you will hear the sharp shriek and howls that seem to come from deep within the underworld. This is a psyche attack that will drive people crazy and make them lose their minds. At the same time, as long as you wear this mask for more than 5 minutes, you will permanently become its slave. This sealed artifact is almost useless. Although it's powerful, it can only be sealed. Only a mighty existence like Mr. Fool can ignore its negative effects. Derek opened his mouth but didn't say a word. Colin Iliad did some recollecting and continued. The third item is called Life's Cane. It can control beyonder creatures with low intelligence and reduce their insanity for a short period of time. It can use incomplete spirits and various materials to complete the ultimate alchemical life. This could create an ordinary human that can exist for a long time. It can also create different dolls that could be used for battle and various kinds of things. This includes stone golems, mud golems, and steel golems. Any living creature lashed by this cane would have an increased tendency towards madness and losing control. Their bodies would also have a certain chance of mutating, producing watermelons, mushrooms, and wheat. Of course, these things cannot be eaten, as they would result in contamination. As for the living beings touched by the cane's tip, they'll be healed no matter how seriously injured they are, other than those that have already lost control. This cane will fill the surrounding areas with a vibrant life force. Be it plants or animals, it can grow with exuberance and reproduce rapidly. Unfortunately, it is useless against this land that is cursed. The person carrying life's cane has a high chance of mutating. The longer one holds it, the higher the odds. This will result in additional organs, or even them having missing body parts, being replaced by various plants. Sounds very sinister. For some reason, Derek felt a little horrified. Finally, he couldn't help but ask, "What's the fourth sealed artifact?" "It's from a demon which lost control. I hunted it and called it Fallen Flute. This is a plain-looking silver flute. However, once someone blows it, the living around it will fall into an unavoidable illusion. Their anger, sorrow, pain, greed, vanity, arrogance, and other desires would rapidly swell. Some would have their mind explode, others lose their sanity or experience a loss of control. Being in the vicinity of Fallen Flute, all sentient beings, other than the wielder, will significantly have their mental facilities deteriorate and will easily make mistakes. At the same time, the wielder of the flute is exceptionally sensitive to danger. Sometimes, they can even predict the possibility of a threat to their lives 1 to 2 days early. Wherever this fallen flute is, one's humanity will gradually degenerate, and all kinds of desires will enter center stage as their beliefs are cast aside. The wielder will also turn cold and be unable to have normal emotions again. The more they use it and the more they carry it, the worse it will be. And this might result in conflict with their own pathways acting, leading to an increased risk of losing control. After introducing the fourth sealed artifact, Colin Iliad's light blue eyes, which seemed to be filled with stories, looked at Derek and asked, "What do you think?" "I need some time to consider," Derek replied rather skillfully. "Indeed, this is really important to you. You can't rashly make a decision." Colin nodded. 3 days later, "We will set off for the afternoon town camp. Tell me your answer before we set off, and reserve some time to familiarize yourself with the sealed artifact." "Yes, Your Excellency." Derek bowed seriously and left the chief's room. He wasn't in a rush to return home to pray to Mr. Fool. Instead, he planned on heading to the training field first to temper his various sunned domain theurgical spells. This was a habit engraved deep within the pulses of every single person in the City of Silver. Only a self-disciplined person who could endure hardship was able to live longer in these desolate and dark lands. In a dark alley in the Backland Bridge area, Zio once again met the golden-masked MI9 member who clearly showed kindness to her. "The judge potion formula might take some time," the golden-masked man said. This was because, although the investigation into Zio didn't continue, it didn't end. Zio pursed her lips and nodded, as though she had finally made up her mind. "I don't want that formula anymore." "You gave up?" The golden-masked man was surprised and couldn't hide his joy. Zio didn't directly answer as she turned her head to the side and said, "I'll exchange all my contributions for cash." After hearing her answer, the golden-masked man nodded in relief. "It's best that you understand. Let bygones be bygones. You, your mother, and brother will have a brand new future. Yes, if your contributions are exchanged for cash, it'll be about £2,000. I'll help you gain more. After that, you can continue being an outer circle member of MI9. Having an official status is very useful for unaffiliated Beyonders." Zio was silent for a few seconds before her lips quivered. "Thank you." She could clearly sense the kindness coming from the man in front of her, so she sincerely thanked him. However, there was no way she was giving up. The reason why she chose cash was because she had already reserved the judge potion formula from the World Gehrman Sparrow. The crazy adventurer had also claimed that the disciplinary paladin potion formula would subsequently follow. At the same time, giving up on the surface could effectively dispel the suspicions of MI9. After briefly explaining the progress of the previous commissions, Zio bade farewell to the golden-masked man and left the alley. On Tuesday morning, Furs went out early and came to the Hat Trick Inn in Sherwood Borough where she met her teacher, Dorian Gray. This is one of the things to take note of in the spirit world. This is a portrait of Botes. Dorian covered his mouth and yawned before handing a thick stack of paper to Furs. Furs wasn't in a rush to read the documents as she cast her gaze at the portrait. On it was a black-robed man who likely wasn't even 40. His brown hair was slightly curled, but it gave off an unusually firm feeling. His dark eyes seemed to contain countless objects. This is the Saint of Secrets. Furs rubbed her fingers together and used her trickmaster powers to burn that portrait. Not bad. Very cautious. Dorian nodded approvingly. He then carried his suitcase and said to Furs, "I have to return to Pritz Harbor. It will arouse suspicion if I come to Backlund for too long." Furs knew that the situation in Backlund had been tense recently, so she was eager for her teacher to leave as soon as possible. Therefore, she didn't hold him back and watched him leave the room. Then, with the help of door opening, she walked all the way to the alley behind the hotel. Just as she got her bearings and turned into a street, she suddenly saw a man in a black trench coat walking over. The person swept a glance at her before looking away naturally. However, Furs's back muscles tensed up. Her eyes reflected the other person's appearance. A man who likely wasn't even 40. His brown hair was slightly curled, but it gave off an unusually firm feeling. His dark eyes seemed to contain countless objects. Chapter 1078 The Hidden Seeker Saint of Secrets Botes. Furs had experienced many things recently, to the point of being watched by a king of angels, so she didn't show any signs of abnormality. She retracted her gaze in a natural manner, and didn't slow down her pace as she walked towards the man in the black trench coat. After a few steps, they brushed past each other. Did he happen to pass by here because of the attraction between Beyonder characteristics? If he knew that teacher was here, he wouldn't be so slow and would use teleport to chase after him. Luckily, teacher has already boarded the carriage and left the inn. Furs's heart calmed down, her tense mind relaxing a little. She took a few more steps forward and looked up at the sky. She wanted to confirm if it would rain later. At this moment, a raven flew over and landed on a tree along the way. It faced the spot where Furs had just passed by. Furs stopped thinking about Saint of Secrets Botes as she maintained her speed and left the street. As the Aurora Order hadn't held a gathering in Backlund for a long period of time, and with the target being a demigod, Furs didn't have any thoughts of seeking revenge for her teacher. Ignoring her lack of combat strength, just finding and locking onto a secret sorcerer was a nearly impossible task. It's best that I wait till I become a traveler. I might encounter Botes by chance before entrusting Mr. World the corresponding mission. I'll take the time to save up money. Now, it's certain that the Aurora Order has saints in Backlund. I can't eliminate the possibility that during Botes' travel elsewhere today, he was influenced by the attraction force of Beyonder characteristic and had accidentally lost his way in Backlund. Furs very naturally considered looking for the World Gehrman Sparrow's help. From what she knew, this gentleman had killed 2 demigods with his own hands, and he had only become a demigod for 3 months. In the upper echelons of the 7 churches, they only have about 10 demigods. Based on Mr. World's progress, it will take him at most 2 years to wipe out the powerhouses of a church. Of course, the real world isn't an ideal measurement. Having received higher education, Furs, who had been a surgeon, gradually let her thoughts wander. She walked to the street and boarded a rental carriage. Above the grey fog, there was a mini-gathering with the Sun Derek, the Hanged Man Alger, and the World Gehrman Sparrow. However, unlike before, Mr. Fool was present as the witness because the Sun's main motive was to find out which sealed artifact could please this great existence, as well as to exchange it for the cross left behind by the Creator. At the same time, he still had some questions to consult Mr. Hanged Man and Mr. World about, so he had applied for a private exchange. Sword of Silver Dawn, Twilight Mask, Life's Cane, Fallen Flute. These were all items that have outstanding powers and negative effects, ones that require sealing. This also confirms that the City of Silver doesn't have any Beyonders from the artisan pathway. All the spoils can only be formed naturally. Even with a godlike sealed artifact, they can shatter the characteristics, but they are unable to reform them in a better way. As the Fool Klein listened to Little Sun's description, he quickly analyzed the pros and cons of different sealed artifacts in his mind. The first thing he did was eliminate the Twilight Mask because the negative effects of the sealed artifact from the City of Silver's first chief were too great. Although Klein could let his marionette wear this mask and cut off the oral senses, thus avoiding the continuous howls and screams. Furthermore, he didn't have to worry about his marionette becoming a slave to the Twilight Mask. However, in that case, his actual body might become a member of the dead who died suddenly for no reason. Following that, Klein similarly gave up the fallen flute for the same reasons. This sealed artifact's ability to predict danger ahead of time was indeed better than the desire apostle in creeping hunger. It was alluring, but the negative effects were also not easy to avoid. If Klein used this flute with his actual body, he would gradually turn cold and lose his normal emotions. This would be completely contradictory with the concept of using humanity to battle godhood to maintain balance. And if he were to hand it over to his marionette, he would experience a significant decrease in his mental facilities and easily make mistakes. This caused him to lose his main advantage as a beyonder of the seer pathway. In addition, this flute will make the people around it give themselves up to degeneration and desires. I don't want the residents on Buckland Street to be degenerates who give up on their morals. By then, how many illegitimate children will be BOM? I can only consider the Sword of Silver Dawn and Life's Cane. Klein mumbled silently before quickly choosing between two. The Sword of Silver Dawn's head engraving seemed to have a living characteristic. To Klein, this meant that communication was possible, and as long as they could communicate, the negative effects could naturally be reduced. As for the height restriction, he could just ignore his thickness and only focus on his height. After all, this didn't affect a clown due to its extremely high sense of balance. Regarding the problem of mutation with Life's Cane, he could avoid it by handing it to his marionettes. When he lost or gained any organs, he could heal himself with Flower of Blood, and causing the surroundings to be filled with vitality. Allowing for lush growth wasn't much of a negative effect. Since the negative effects of the two sealed artifacts weren't too serious, he had to consider their effects. The Sword of Silver Dawn was clearly from a demon hunter of the warrior pathway. Be it attacks or defense, they were both potent. It could hide his malintent and be good at dealing with devils. As for Life's Cane, it was good at creating and causing mutations, which made it rather sinister. After a few seconds of consideration, when Derek asked for the answer, the fool Klein spoke unhurriedly, as though he was discussing something ordinary. The cane. In the end, he decided on Life's Cane. In fact, the Sword of Silver Dawn and Life's Cane had their own pros, making it a tough decision. Klein's final decision stemmed from an uncommon reason. The sinister Life's Cane could be described as bizarre, so it could effectively aid him in acting as a bizarro sorcerer and raise his potion digestion speed. Yes, Mr. Fool, Derek replied, unable to hide his joy. This meant that when he completed the sacrificial and bestowment ritual, he would obtain the cross from the Creator. After determining this, he cast his gaze at the figure at the bottom of the long bronze table. Mr. World, other than the complete brain of an adult mind dragon, do you still need a relatively high sequence potion formula for the plantar pathway? As the secret passage of the Giant King's court was shared by the world, he became the target of Derek's question, and not Mr. Fool. Of course, to Derek, the world was Mr. Fool's blessed. His answer represented Mr. Fool's intentions to a certain extent. A relatively high sequence potion formula for the plantar pathway. Sitting at the end of the long bronze table, the fool Klein immediately had a headache and fell into an intense internal struggle. He could roughly understand what the chief of the City of Silver's thought process was. On the one hand, this experienced demon hunter hopes that he can usher in a bright future through the Giant King's court's exploration, while on the other hand, he's still cautious and doesn't hold much hope. He's prepared to continue staying in the darkness, so he mentioned the plantar potion formula to see if Mr. Fool has the corresponding authority, or rather, does the faction that he watches over have a need for it. If this could bring about certain feedback, it would effectively improve the survival of the City of Silver. Meanwhile, on Klein's end, Frank Lee had recently come to believe that he's just one step away from his research goals. When he becomes a druid, he should be able to succeed. This made Klein very hesitant on whether he should give him a push. I don't know what the future holds. I'll just focus on what's in front of me. A Sequence 5 Beyonder who doesn't even have godhood wouldn't be able to do anything too serious. Furthermore, Ma'am Hermit is already a demigod. It's not a big problem for her to watch out for Frank. Klein thought for a moment and let the World Gehrman Sparrow say, Sequence 5. What if there's more? Derek pressed. Klein felt like he was being tested. After a few seconds of silence he said, if your side is willing to give it, then that works, all right? Derek didn't probe any further. Instead, he asked the person beside him, Mr. Hanged Man, I have a strange feeling about this. Why did the chief suddenly mention the relatively high sequence potion formula of the plantar pathway? The Hanged Man Alger looked at the World Gehrman Sparrow and said, This should be a test from your chief, to see if the City of Silver can change its environment. I remember you mentioning that you only know that the goddess of harvest is the giant king's queen, and according to the records of the Sanguine from the moon, the goddess of harvest is named Omabella. Your City of Silver originally believed in her. I was originally only certain that the name Omabella was real, so I didn't have any inclination towards other explanations. Now, with your chief suddenly taking out a relatively high sequence potion formula that you didn't know before, this makes me suspect that the moon is right. This means that your City of Silver hid the fact that they once believed in the goddess of harvest. They even deliberately didn't mention her true name. There must be a huge secret behind this. A huge secret. Derek thought seriously but couldn't think of any secret. Fortunately, this wasn't an important matter to him. He quickly ended the private conversation and returned to the City of Silver to prepare for the exchange of sealed artifacts. Chapter 1079. The hard-working gardeners above the grey fog. Klein, who was sitting at the fool's seat, beckoned for the unshadowed crucifix. The bronze cross was tied together with an ordinary-looking button, and the surface of the latter was already covered with a layer of crystalline but heavy-feeling particles. This was the hermit Catlia's judge button. It was reserved for Judgment Zio at a price of £3,500. Therefore, Admiral of Stars had sacrificed it to Mr. Fool in advance, requesting the mighty existence to get an angel under him to shatter it. And on Monday's tarot gathering, Zio had made a reservation for the judge potion formula at a price of £2,000. According to their agreement, Justice Audrey wasn't to share anything they obtained from exploring Grozelle's travels, other than knowledge. She was only providing free help for the world-killing Vin Rambus. As for the Star Leonard, he had the right to sell the potion formulas and historical knowledge, but obviously, Judgment Zio trusted the world Gehrman Sparrow more. The purging should be almost done. This way, I can trade the unshadowed crucifix with Little Sun without any worries. In the future, if there are other similar requests, they'll definitely be more willing to trade with Little Sun, instead of asking Mr. Fool for help. No one will dare frequently disturb a hidden existence, unless there's really no other way. When Little Sun has the chance to become a demigod and transform the unshadowed crucifix into a special characteristic, I should be a sequence 3. I'll be able to use the power of this mysterious space above the grey fog to shatter sealed artifacts. After the disinfection process of the grey fog, Adam probably wouldn't be able to rely on the unshadowed crucifix to lock onto Little Sunday. However, even if he were able to find it through this, it wouldn't be too serious. His brother, Amon, knew long ago that Little Sun is related to Mr. Fool. Yes, it seems that Amon can freely enter and leave the forsaken land of the gods. I wonder if that's also the case for Adam. As Klein separated the unshadowed crucifix from the button that had begun to praise the sun, he looked at the Beyonder characteristic that had been purged while waiting for Little Sun to hold a sacrificial and bestowment ceremony. The City of Silver. Within the spire. Derek Berg had finished setting up the ritual. He watched as a black mud-covered doll approached with a wooden cane which looked like nothing special, and he placed it on the altar. After a serious prayer and doing some work, the illusory sacrifice and bestowment door opened and took away Life's cane, leaving behind a bronze-green and spiky cross. At the same time, the name of the cross suddenly appeared in Derek's mind, including information of its usage and its negative effects. He suppressed his excitement and first thanked Mr. Fool before ending the ritual. He walked to the front of the altar, picked up the unshadowed crucifix, and scrutinized it repeatedly. After tidying up, Derek left and went to a room opposite and knocked on the chief's door. "Come in." Colin Iliad's deep voice rang out. Derek turned the doorknob, pushed open the door, walked in, and openly revealed the bronze cross. "Your Excellency, this is the item left behind by the Lord I previously mentioned. It's called the unshadowed crucifix. The method is to let the spikes on it be stained with the blood of the holder." He had deliberately changed the term relic to the item left behind. The white-haired Colin had already cast his gaze over when Derek took out the ancient cross. After listening to the introduction, he walked towards it with heavy steps. He took the item and kept examining it. Finally, Colin Iliad placed his thumb on a thorn and allowed fresh blood to flow out. The mottled bronze green started to peel away as the unshadowed crucifix revealed a physical body formed from pure light, illuminating the entire room without any trace of darkness. After an indescribable sacred feeling filled the surrounding area, Colin released his fingers and sighed. This is indeed the Lord's item. Although he was born in an era more than 2,000 years since the City of Silver was forsaken, making it impossible for them to sense the aura of God. This city still had quite a few things that were used to offer sacrifices to the Creator. Every time the black-faced grass was harvested, they would be taken out and used in the ritual. Through a comparison with these items, Colin Iliad could almost confirm the origins of the cross. Derek had wanted to give a response, but the heavy tone in the chief's words suddenly pressed down on his heart, preventing him from speaking. Colin Iliad didn't make any further comments and just stood there silently with the unshadowed crucifix in hand. After a few seconds, the City of Silver chief broke the silence and said with a slightly hoarse voice, "The return of the Lord's item is a sign. We shall welcome the sign of dawn. I will hold on to this unshadowed crucifix for half a day. I want to gather all the elders in the city to present this item to them. Heh. Even I can't casually deal with a saint-level sealed artifact. Since I lost Life's Cane, I have to explain it to the other elders and request to be punished. You must remember that, as chief, you must have the courage to shoulder the corresponding responsibilities. You can't avoid punishment just because you think that it's good for the City of Silver. You might be right this time, but you can't guarantee that you're always right. Don't worry. This unshadowed crucifix will eventually return to you." The chief's words are deep and profound. I'll get Mr. Hanged Man to explain it to me at the next tarot gathering. Derek instinctively wanted to raise his right hand and scratch the back of his head, but in the end, he endured it and informed Colin Iliad of the negative effects of the unshadowed crucifix. Backland North Borough. 160 Buckland Street. Klein sacrificed Winner Anuni above the grey fog to ensure marionette preservation. This was to make it convenient for him to use him in the future. He planned on getting Earl of the Fallen Kona's Kilgore to wear the Flower of Blood ring and wield Life's Cane. In day-to-day life, he would create some harrowing and bizarre situations from time to time, helping him expedite the digestion of his potion. This way, Anuni had no way of using Flower of Blood to hide in Kona's Kilgore's stomach. He needed to hide in a more concealed manner, making it rather troublesome. Therefore, Klein decided to simply leave him above the grey fog. After all, Klein could create ordinary marionettes any time he wanted. Why does the action of placing a marionette in a preservation cabinet to keep fresh feel odd? It's not like I'm acting in a horror movie. However, this does fit the name of Bizarro Sorcerer a bit. The angel from the Antigonus and Zeridal family all hang up their marionettes to wind dry, so I'm much better than them. After rubbing his chin, Klein stuffed the ordinary wood-colored cane into a specially made cane he bought through misjudgment. The cane was hollow, and it could be used to contain a sword that wasn't considered too wide. It was perfect for hiding Life's Cane. After he was done with this work, he allowed the servant who looked like Anuni, who was actually Kona's, to take away his cane and return to the room next door. He washed up himself before getting into bed. While sleeping soundly in a pleasant relaxed state, Klein's spiritual perceptions suddenly stirred. He abruptly sat up and cast his gaze at the attached balcony. The curtains weren't fully drawn, and he could see the situation outside. It was dark green outside the window with vine leaves, and flowers were growing all over the place in layers. This made him suspect that he had been transported to the forest. The corners of his mouth twitched as he vaguely guessed what was going on. He rolled out of bed and walked to the balcony, drawing the curtains open. What entered his vision was no longer the garden in the residence of Dwayne Dantes. Instead, it was a lush forest. This is what it means to make the surrounding area become filled with a vibrant life force. Be it animals or plants, they're all flourishing and growing rapidly. Isn't this a little too fast? Klein's expression instantly turned a little blank. Previously, when he had divined that the Life's Cane's negative effects, he had seen similar scenes. However, the revelation he received was that it wasn't harmful to the surrounding area. Thus, he believed that the growing and proliferation process took a fairly long period of time and could be effectively controlled, allowing one to pay no attention to it for a very, very long time before seeing such a scene. With this thought in mind, he observed all the spirit body threads in the surrounding area. He realized that humans weren't affected at all, but the number of rats and cockroaches was clearly increasing. This result made him heave a sigh of relief. He looked out of the window at the forest and sighed silently. Indeed, there isn't much danger. It's just quite exaggerated. I still have to keep it above the grey fog most of the time. More than 10 seconds later, figures appeared within the forest. Some of them were very thin, and others were thick. They all wore black trench coats, and their faces were very flat. They had no eyes, noses and mouths. These figures were either crouching or standing, busy burning weeds, cutting the vines, and removing the unnecessary flowers in the quiet night. The next morning, Butler Walter woke up as usual and opened the window. The garden outside was bathed in the morning fog. There was some dew that gathered, emitting a fresh scent. Better than yesterday. Walter nodded slightly and praised the two gardeners. The vibrant scene made him feel a little restless as he began missing his wife for no apparent reason. So he left the room to patrol the estate and made arrangements for all sorts of affairs. Finally, he waited at the entrance of the dining room. Not long after, his employer, Dwayne Dantes, led his valet, Anuni, down from the third floor. Walter went forward to bow and talked about today's arrangements before taking the initiative to mention it. "Sir, I would like to take 1 day leave from the current month's allowance." As he spoke, he suddenly saw the mixed-blood servant's neck split open, revealing a black eye. Walter was shocked and nearly tumbled backward. But in the blink of an eye, he realized that there was no strange eye on Anuni's neck. "It must be because I didn't sleep well last night and had a strange dream, resulting in me being distracted and having hallucinations." Walter hurriedly gathered his thoughts and lowered his head slightly. In his heart, Klein apologized and nodded. "No problem. Have a wonderful day with your family." Chapter 1080. The line of thinking for acting. After watching Butler Walter leave the second floor, Klein entered the dining hall. As he looked around, he realized that the servants were much more energetic than usual. They even felt a little agitated. Indeed, life's cane also affects humans, but it's not that ridiculous. It's at a rather normal level and still within acceptable levels. According to this logic, the servants' reproduction abilities would definitely increase. The only problem is that they don't have spouses, so there's no way to show that. Will Mr. Butler's act of returning home today result in him having another child in 9 to 10 months? His wife is almost 40 years old. It's a little dangerous for her to have children at this age. Of course, as the other party in the copulation process, the effects of life's cane would pass over to them. There shouldn't be any problems. Man, I wonder if the potential effect will result in an increase in conceiving a child. If Dwayne Dantes' moving into Buckland Street causes one to have an increased chance of having children, my reputation will practically be doomed. Klein's thoughts drifted without end. Finally, he concluded in his mind, life's cane truly is very sinister. In the future, he would only bring it into the real world for some time each day and try his best not to affect the humans around him. After breakfast, Klein brought his valet, Anuni, to the first floor and prepared to take a stroll. At that moment, 2 chambermaids were cleaning in the main hall. "Good morning, sir." Upon seeing Dwayne Dantes approach, the 2 chambermaids immediately stood up, made way for him, and greeted him. Of course, if they were in a more remote coma, they would try their best not to make a sound, just in case they disturbed their employer. This was something they learned from Butler Walter's teachings. Klein nodded and gave a simple response as he slowly approached the door. At that moment, the 2 maids suddenly saw a wheat head embedded in Anuni's head. It was full of golden particles and was extremely attractive. Before they could even take a closer look, the valet seemed to have sensed something amiss. He raised his right hand and yanked off the piece of wheat using plenty of force. The 2 maids looked at each other in surprise and amusement. They imagined that Anuni had accidentally gotten some wheat on his body when he followed Mr. Dantes over to Mager Manor, bringing it all the way back to 160 Buckland Street, where they scattered in places that weren't easy to clean. For example, under the pillow he slept last night. In his dreams, he pushed the pillow away and ended up lodging a piece of wheat into his hair without realizing it when washing up in the morning and during breakfast. Although this process was complicated and not easily achieved, it was still possible. It can't be that Anuni grew a single wheat head, right? The 2 maids mumbled to themselves as they continued with their work. After exiting 160 Buckland Street, Klein and Anuni slowly walked with one behind the other under the withered Intis parasol trees, breathing in the fresh autumn air. Like him, a number of neighbors were taking a morning stroll. Of course, this wasn't a habit belonging to those amongst Buckland's high society. Last year, the smog was very serious, and the air was quite pungent. No one was willing to waste their time in the streets, braving the cold wind and the humidity. As a neighbor, since they had met each other, there was no doubt that they would greet each other. When they walked past each other, one of the lawyers glanced at Dwayne Dantes' valet from the corner of his eye. He had raised his hand to cover his mouth as if he was yawning. When the mixed-blood youth put down his right hand, the lawyer suddenly realized something was different. His nose seems to be even higher. Haha, I must have been thinking too much about such matters, causing me to hallucinate. If only my nose was slightly higher. As the lawyer thought about it, he raised his hand and rubbed his nose. At the same time, he saw two wild dogs engaged in a chase in front of him, attempting to reproduce on the street. After the stroll, Klein returned to the activity room on the third floor and sent Life's cane above the gray fog. Indeed, there's a certain effect. The main point of the Bizarro Sorcerer's digestion is actually to create shocking scenes to scare people, as well as use a strange method to make people horrified. This really does resemble a director, but it's just a horror flick's director. Yes, I don't have to really scare them. Peaceful daily life events contain terrifying scenes, but the surrounding humans don't notice them at all. They only occasionally made the connection, and when they think about it, they would feel a sense of fear from certain possibilities, to the point of not daring to turn off the lights and ending up having nightmares. That's also a horror film archetype. As Klein observed his condition, he summarized his experiences over the past few months and finally summed it all up with the keyword horror film director. After understanding this, he had many ideas on how to quickly digest the potion. Not only did he have to deal with enemies, but he also had to turn his enemies into the main characters or important supporting roles in a horror film. This will be quite troublesome. I definitely have to give my all to the targets at the demigod level. I wouldn't be in the mood to waste my time and effort on pulling some tricks. Well, there's no need to find a demigod target. There's no restriction for acting like this. I can't teleport to the sea and find some lucky pirates to participate, creating some horror stories. That's right. Since I'm a director, I have to let my works spread. It seems like I have to let some of the actors escape successfully every time and spread the nightmare that they experienced, creating a corresponding myth at sea. I can't feed them to creeping hunger. As he formed his plan, Klein suddenly thought of a question. In the horrifying legends of the people in the northern continent and the sea, how many of them were deliberately created by Bizarro sorcerers? There must be some. Sigh, if Amon were to act as a Bizarro sorcerer, he would probably be able to digest the potion in less than a month. His talent in this aspect is astounding, and he doesn't consider the consequences. In truth, while looking for pirates to film the horror movie, I can find an opportunity to scare other demigods. I don't have to fight them to the death. Once my goal is accomplished, I can escape. With this thought in mind, Klein came up with a plan for the supporting role. Hence, he carefully considered his targets. There's no way I can find an angel or higher. Those who I'm not familiar with will make me the leading character of a horror movie on the spot. Those who are familiar with me are well aware that I'm a Bizarro sorcerer, so there's no way to scare them. There are many saints that I have no idea about their whereabouts. Frightening the archbishops will easily cause unnecessary chain reactions, causing the world situation to become even more tense and for the war to erupt premature. After eliminating all the possibilities, the most suitable target is the numinous episcopate's artificial death faction's demigod, Patrick Bryan, as well as the counselors of Willa Septon's Fate Council. As Xueqi after creating a name list, Klein decided to take some time over the next 2 days to visit Dr. Aaron Series. He wanted to bring some ice cream for a certain baby to ask where the counselors were recently seen. If he wanted to frighten someone else's subordinates, he had to get the approval of the president. Klein was in a good mood after organizing his thoughts. He went out again and went to St. Samuel Cathedral to pray and donate before heading to the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation where he stayed till noon. In the afternoon, he saw a few businessmen and professional lawyers and accountants who were seeking investments, behaving like a normal tycoon. After filling his stomach, he returned to the half-opened room with the balcony. Just as he was considering whether to visit Dr. Aaron Series' house directly tomorrow, or invite their family to have a nice dinner at the Srenzo restaurant which served excellent ice cream, his spiritual perception was triggered. He turned his head and, without any surprise, saw Miss Messenger walk out of the void with 4 blonde red-eyed heads. One of the heads bit on a letter. Who sent it? Klein habitually and expectantly asked. As he had yet to receive the letter, Rionette Tynker could only answer with 3 heads. King of Idiots, Patrick Bryan. This nickname has even evolved? Klein reached out and took the letter. When he opened it, he realized that it was indeed from the Artificial Death Faction's demigod. He wrote on the letter, "I've already prepared the special ritual that will help my teacher, Hater, recover further. Your Excellency, I will hold it tomorrow at midnight given your permission. The ritual that points towards the angel, Hater? There's no way to avoid the numinous episcopate's Artificial Death Faction's testing of Patrick. This can be interfered with using Paper Angel. Just in time. With a flick of his wrist, Klein burned the letter. Following that, he took out a piece of paper and wrote down an answer. Yes, you may. You must be careful. In the quiet night, near midnight, in an uninhabited clothes factory in St. George Borough, there was an open area that had been cleared. Nearly 10 black-robed figures were standing there. In the middle of them was a deep black coffin that looked rather heavy. Around the coffin were many golden ornaments with mud stains. There were many candles flickering with pale white flames, as well as one skull after another. The hideous white skulls belonged to humans, others from animals. Some were extremely strange and had a deformed look to it. It was hard to imagine their original appearance. The skulls were piled the highest up at the front, with Patrick Bryan standing there. He had also changed into a black robe, but he didn't pull up his hood, revealing a deep outline. He had black hair, brown eyes, and a rather long face. This demigod hadn't done anything, but his surroundings had turned extremely cold, as though countless invisible creatures were celebrating. As Patrick Bryan raised his right hand, the hooded believers jumped up and twitched a little. It was a crazy and rhythmic dance. This was a spirit dance, a ritual that death loved. The stronger the spirituality of the dancers, the better the effects. As the dance became more intense, a cold and formless wind blew out from the coffin. Patrick Bryan lowered his head and recited in a language that seemed to come from the underworld. The king from the depths of hell, an angel playing the music of death, the ruler above river Styx. Chapter 1081. The Returnee. With Patrick Bryan's chanting, the bones around the black casket were gradually stained with a dark green layer. They blended with the white, bringing out an extremely scary sensation. As the spirit dance became more and more intense, as though the voices from the underworld were constantly reverberating, the bones floated up one by one, as though they possessed lives of their own. Then, they were cast towards the heavy and pitch-black casket in what could be described as orderly chaos. They passed through the lid and entered as though they were incorporeal. The casket immediately transformed into a deep whirlpool that seemed like it couldn't be filled. It expanded on the spot, emitting a cold aura that was high and mighty. This made Patrick Bryan instinctively tremble and lower his head. This was an angel, the aura of a death consul. At that moment, the believers of death, the ones who were dancing spirit dance, all collapsed to the ground with their bodies left convulsing. Their consciousness became muddled, as though they were touring the underworld. And above the grey fog, with the help of his marionette's prayer points of light, the fool Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief because the leader of the numinous episcopate's artificial death faction, the angel who was sleeping in the mausoleum, the high priest Hater's test didn't exceed his expectations. Using the enslavement and control higher sequence beyonders of the death pathway had on lower sequence beyonders, he could directly obtain information from Patrick Bryan. From a certain point of view, this was an interrogation at the psyche level, something that Klein was rather proficient at dealing with. He immediately let the red priest card fly into his hand and enter his body. All of a sudden, Klein had a dark red robe draped over him. This appearance seemed to look like rust and settled gunpowder. As for his face, it was covered by a dark gold mask. The patterns on it were ancient and set off a contrasting appearance with the crown he wore that was embedded with gems that sparkled red, blue, and green. Following that, he mobilized all the powers of the mysterious space above the gray fog that he could, turning them into invisible torrents that surrounded the paper figurines he had prepared in advance. Through the prayer lights, it shot towards undying Patrick Bryan. At this moment, Patrick's body trembled slightly due to the feeling of submission he felt towards his teacher's aura, as though he could see layers of holy wings. Klein had hidden the exact appearance of the flaming angel, allowing a portion of it to be revealed. This also meant that he had interfered with the special effects. One holy wing after another enveloped Patrick before vanishing, causing him to hallucinate in confusion. As a Sequence 4 demigod, he quickly came to his senses. He realized that he no longer yearned to submit and not be able to disobey his teacher's orders. His consciousness seemed to have been pulled out of his body as he stared calmly at everything above the mind world. At the same time, as a zealot, Patrick Bryan didn't hesitate to view Angel's embrace as a gift from death. There was no doubt about it. At that moment, in the deep vortex formed from the black casket, an old and cold voice sounded out, one that could rip out a person's soul from their bodies. Not bad. Any progress in awakening God recently? Patrick Bryan followed the instructions given by the blessed, and he described his efforts and intentions in a half-truthful manner. After a series of questions and answers, The Death Domain angel on the other side of the vortex, Hater, didn't suspect anything. He calmly said, "Very good. Continue doing it. I will support you." He paused for a moment and nonchalantly said, "I'll send you an assistant first. A Sequence 5 gatekeeper to help you in completing the corresponding tasks to relieve your stress." Is this what His Excellency mentioned about not being at ease with me? Teacher is indeed unwilling to see me gain the favor of God and threaten his position. Having been slowly influenced by Klein through his daily communications with him, Patrick Bryan, who had slowly changed his mindset, had no way of rejecting such kind intentions. He could only answer politely, "Yes, teacher." Just as he said that, the pitch-black vortex suddenly opened up. It transformed into a mysterious pattern, conjuring up a pair of indescribable double bronze doors. With a creaking sound, the door opened and a crack widened. There was still darkness behind the rift, and there seemed to be eyes hidden in the depths of the darkness, quietly watching the outside. At that moment, a palm stretched out and rested on the door crack. Its skin was rather pale, allowing one to see the blue blood veins underneath. With a tug, a figure leaped out of the door. This was a young tall man wearing a black robe with red linings with his hood pulled up. His facial features were gentle, and his skin was slightly brown. It was obvious at a glance that he was from a southern continent bloodline. He was rather handsome, but he looked anemic. Stepping on the solid ground beneath his feet, the young man didn't even glance at Patrick Bryan. He raised his head and looked into the sky. The corners of his mouth curled up as he narrowed his eyes and sighed. This intoxicating atmosphere, as a beyonder of the death pathway, to be ignored by someone whose sequence was lower than his. There was no doubt that Patrick Bryan was a little angry, but in front of his teacher, he had no choice but to follow the flow and end the ritual. During this process, the fool's response above the gray fog was even more intense than Patrick's. Because through the gray fog's true vision, he could see the abnormality of the new gatekeeper. The gatekeeper's internal underworld expanded in an odd manner, covering every part of his body. And there was only one soul in the underworld, a young and handsome soul with red hair, signs of rotting on its face, and a flag mark on its glabella. It wore black blood-stained armor. Klein wasn't unfamiliar with this soul, for he immediately recognized it, the Red Angel evil spirit, Sauron Einha Medici. This fellow has returned to Backlund again, and had a certain working relationship with the angel of the numinous episcopate's artificial death faction. Klein instinctively took out the Red Priest card and accommodated the Tyrant card before summoning the Sea God Scepter. He planned on giving the Red Angel evil spirit a zap of lightning storm, but as his thoughts raced, he restrained this impulse and gave up on the corresponding thoughts. This would expose Patrick Bryan's problem and let the angel from the Death Domain guess that something had happened to artificial death. This wasn't beneficial to the Evernight goddess's control and digestion of the death pathway's uniqueness. Amidst his thoughts, he quickly left the world above the gray fog and returned to the real world. He made his marionette secretly leave the clothing factory and teleport away with his body. He had originally planned on creating a shocking experience for Patrick Bryan after the ritual. He had even made some preparations beforehand. Now, he could only give up to prevent the Red Angel evil spirit from discovering him. Inside the clothing factory, the young gatekeeper, who had been possessed by Sauron Einhorn Medici, pulled his hood even lower before turning his head slightly and looking in a particular direction outside. That was the spot where Klein's marionette, Kona's Kilgore, had been hiding, nearly a kilometer away from the factory. After staring at it for a few seconds, the young gatekeeper revealed an obvious smile. Just as Patrick Bryan was about to say something, planning to use his identity of the person in charge of the numinous episcopate's artificial death faction to haze the envoy of his teacher, his spiritual perception was triggered. He turned around in a bizarre manner, casting his gaze on another building in the factory. On the second floor of the building, behind a glass window in a room, there was a pair of emotionless black eyes staring at them. Patrick Bryan's eyelids twitched, and his body suddenly vanished. A cold wind blew, causing the glass window to rot silently. Without any movement, it crumbled into countless snowflakes. In the corresponding room, a skinny Patrick in a black robe and a thin face emerged. He saw that the master of that pair of cold black eyes was a rough mud doll. Who made the doll? Who moved it here? Patrick Bryan looked around cautiously, not missing any corners. Just as he turned his gaze towards the corridor and faced the glass window with his body slanted, the crude black eyes of the mud doll suddenly turned. Then, it raised its hands and grabbed Patrick's neck. Halfway through the action, The mud doll seemed to lose its support and lost all mobility. Many cracks appeared on its surface as it instantly shattered into pieces. Patrick Bryan's figure disappeared first before he appeared in the corridor, staring at the collapsed doll as if he was facing a most powerful enemy. At that moment, he had really jumped in fright. Although there were all sorts of bizarre and harrowing matters related to spirits, it was still quite scary for a puppet to suddenly come alive without the influence of an external spirit body. The mud doll lay there quietly in fragments without so much as a stir. Patrick Bryan waited patiently for a while before finally confirming that there were no more abnormalities. He shuttled through the spirit world once again and returned to the place where the ritual had been held. At that moment, the heavy pitch-black casket had completely decayed. It was as if it had been buried in the ground for centuries, if not millennia, and the surrounding underworld believers were slowly recovering from their semi-conscious state. Patrick Bryan looked around but could not find the young gatekeeper sent by his teacher. He didn't know when he had left. Isn't he here to spy on me? The demigod of the death pathway was at a loss. Taking into consideration the abnormal discovery he had made, the living mud doll, Patrick Bryan didn't delay any further. He quickly snapped his followers awake and cleaned up the scene and removed all traces. After he was done, he suddenly heard a voice. "Is this clothing factory yours?" Patrick Bryan's figure instantly disappeared and appeared again, now facing the person who spoke. That was the young gatekeeper who had gone somewhere. No. Patrick frowned slightly. How could he do such a thing in his own factory? If he was exposed, wouldn't there be no way out? Not too stupid, the young gatekeeper nodded gently. Patrick narrowed his eyes and suppressed his anger. "Where did you go?" The young gatekeeper chuckled and said, "I visited some familiar spots and met a friend." Chapter 1082 Sudden Turn of Events 160 Buckland Street. Inside Dwayne Dantes' mansion. After teleporting back, Klein didn't delay at all. He immediately set up an altar and held a ritual to pray to death. "You are the essence of death. You are the Lord of the dead. You are the final home to all living beings. I pray for your help. I pray that you will know how to resolve the problem of the Red Angel evil spirit. He has possessed the body of a gatekeeper and is cooperating with the numinous episcopate's high priest, Hater. He has come to Backland and been made an assistant to Patrick Bryan. With regard to this matter, there was really no choice but to seek help from the Evernight goddess. Ignoring the possibility of seeking out the ascetic leader Ariana in a cooperation effort, or whether he had the ability to finish off Sauron Einhorn Medici, even if he could, once the Red Angel evil spirit disappeared, the numinous episcopate's artificial death faction's high priest would immediately understand that something major had happened here. He could then connect it to other abnormalities and determine that there was something wrong with artificial death's condition. Then, using his own level and status, possible sealed artifacts, and his familiarity with the pathway, he might be able to create mutually harmful acts of destruction. And if he ignored the Red Angel, this evil spirit who was a conspirer wouldn't take long to detect something abnormal with Patrick Bryan. With his knowledge and intelligence, it wasn't difficult to guess the nature of the problem. No matter how I deal with it, it'll be a problem. As expected of an angel in the war domain. Even if he is a 3-in-1 spirit body, he can still create unresolvable problems for others. This must have actually been an idea that he gave Hater. Actually, I do have an extreme idea. That is to let the Red Angel evil spirit be killed by other churches, official organizations, or secret organizations for another whole different matter. In short, anything related to the goddess cannot come center stage. Things must be made very clear. The difficulty with this approach is how to let an extremely experienced, high-ranking member of the conspiring domain fall into a trap. If I don't handle it well, it might backfire on me. After the prayer ended, Klein casually let his thoughts wander as he waited patiently for the Evernight goddess to give him a response. After more than 10 seconds, the herbal dregs that pleased the deity were swept up by an invisible wind. They flew out and landed on the table, forming words. His coming spells the raising of arms. What does that mean? Looking at the sentence that gave him a sense of déjà vu, he frowned slightly. As a seer, he habitually interpreted it. Due to the king's problem, Lone has fallen into the shadows of war. Hence, the Red Angel that symbolizes war came. This means that it might no longer be possible to stop the war. Upon reaching sequence 1, one would become a symbol of certain phenomena. As these thoughts flashed through Klein's mind, the invisible wind came to a stop. The altar, which was completely isolated by the wall of spirituality, turned extremely silent. There are no other revelations? After waiting for a while, Klein confirmed that this was all, so he ended the ritual and cleared the altar. He then walked to the sofa in the room and sat down to see if anything else would happen. After a full 15 minutes, he didn't usher in the arrival of the matron of the Evernight cloister, the leader of the 13 archbishops, angel of concealment, Ariana. I don't have to deal with the red angel evil spirit, and I should just leave him be? Or, there's another solution, but my involvement isn't needed? In essence, he wasn't a devout believer of Evernight. Since the goddess said that he didn't need to bother about it, he naturally couldn't be bothered to do so. After all, this matter was not only extremely troublesome for him, but it was also extremely dangerous. Shaking his head, Klein took out a pen and paper from his pocket and began a dream divination. What had happened tonight made him feel that he couldn't waste any time. He had to digest the Bizarro sorcerer potion as soon as possible. Above the fog sea, inside a steam-powered merchant ship that was extremely close to a pirate ship. One by one, the men and older women were tied up and pushed to the edge of the deck. Then, the pirates either used their hands or legs to throw them into the sea. The splashing sounds didn't affect the pirates at all, guffawing over this bloodless massacre. After clearing the captives, they carried their guns and lanterns to the shipboard, preparing to enjoy the pitiful bugs struggling. However, under the light, the dark blue sea beside the boat quietly undulated. No one was there. They sank so quickly, a pirate blurted out in surprise. The leader of this pirate crew frowned. After looking at it for a while, he said, "Perhaps some sea monsters passed by and treated those who dared resist us as food bestowed by the gods. Perfect timing. If we feed it, it won't attack us." Upon saying this, the leader waved his hand. "Everyone, enjoy yourselves." As a fairly experienced pirate, he knew that there were many strange things at sea. It was best not to seek out the reason and try to figure out the truth. Since it didn't harm him or his crew, he would thank the Lord of Storms for his blessings, doing so as though nothing had happened. After making sure that there were people on duty, the pirates began gulping down copious amounts of alcohol, ate huge chunks of meat, and sang loudly, and fought for the rights to the young female captives. In the noisy and lively atmosphere, the pirate leader led a beautiful passenger that he had long taken a liking to into the captain's room. He eagerly began the final process for that night of revelry. In the middle of the night, the tired pirate leader stretched out his right hand and touched something cold. He jolted awake. Through the crimson moonlight shining through the window, he saw a piece of coarse wood in his arms. A series of branches with green leaves grew out from the wooden block, hugging him like a human's limbs. Pah! The pirate leader's pupils rapidly dilated. As he pushed away the wood, jumped off the bed, and stumbled back. Was I with such a thing previously? His mind was filled with terror. He couldn't care less about his clothes, picking up a flintlock and cutlass before leaving the room immediately. Outside, there was a pirate on duty. "How can I be happy to steal your ear?" When the pirate saw his leader open the door, he quickly asked. The pirate leader had originally wanted to chide the other party for secretly drinking, resulting in his incoherence. However, when he looked up, he saw that his subordinate's mouth and his surroundings were filled with golden grains. Even the surface of his tongue was covered in dense clusters. The pirate leader's scalp tightened as he felt a numbing chill run down his spine. At this moment, the door across the corridor opened as well. A pirate shouted with a sobbing tone, "Oh no! Boss, I have a lot of mushrooms growing there." As he spoke, the pirate ran out. At the same time, he felt his eyes itch. He raised his hand and rubbed his right eye. As he rubbed his eyes, a green vine slowly grew out from the gaps between his eye socket and his eyeball. There was a dark red grape at the end of it. The flesh around the grape was a blur. The pirate leader's body froze when he saw this. He asked in a voice that didn't belong to him, "What did you guys encounter?" While rubbing his eye, the pirates who didn't notice the problem said without any recollection, "A pole-like shadow struck me." You. The pirate whose tongue was covered in golden wheat echoed. He was blocked by his leader and didn't see his fellow crew members' terrifying appearance. The pirate leader's legs began to shake uncontrollably. He instinctively turned around and ran out of the cabin. At this moment, he saw a long wall that looked like a shadow from a pole rapidly sweep towards him before lashing out at him. The shadow flashed and soon disappeared. It was as though it was a surreal nightmare. The pirate leader was just a beat slower before he subconsciously raised his hand to block. This was obviously not effective. Then, he looked at himself in panic and didn't find anything unusual. Thankfully. The pirate leader couldn't help but let out a sigh. Before he could finish, he suddenly heard a slightly muffled voice. Thankfully. This voice seemed to come from his body. The pirate leader's pupils dilated to the extreme as he involuntarily lifted up his clothes. He then saw 3 cracks appear between his chest, 1 big, 2 small. 2 rows of white teeth were neatly arranged in the large crack, and in the middle of the small crack were 2 lively and nimble eyeballs embedded in them. It was a mouth and 2 eyes. The pirate leader had a mouth and 2 eyes on his chest. No! A scream rang out from the boat, filled with indescribable terror. In the next 15 minutes, some of the pirates went mad and killed their companions. Some successfully escaped back to their own ship, only to discover that the people on it had also turned mutated. Hence, they jumped into the sea in despair. By the time everything calmed down, there were only about 10 normal pirates slumped on the deck and hiding in their rooms. There was a stench around them. After a while, passengers came out of the cabin one after another. They looked at the scene in front of them in disbelief. They either thanked the gods or stood there in a daze. It was early in the morning. Klein got out of bed and began to wash up. Just as he was changing his clothes with the help of his valet, Enuni, he saw butler Walter, who had just returned from a leave of absence, walk to the door and say, "Sir, Bishop Electra is here to pay a visit. Let him wait for me in the activity room where he can enjoy a cigar." Klein hesitated for a moment before saying. He suspected that this was a late response from the goddess. Walter immediately turned around and went downstairs to make the arrangements. Before long, he returned and said, "Sir, Bishop Electra has already bade farewell and left. He wanted me to tell you that you must go to St. Samuel Cathedral in the morning. He said that the church and the government are going to hold an air raid drill together." Air raid drill? Klein frowned. At that moment, his spiritual perception was triggered. He turned around and looked out the window. In the air, there were rows of dark brown-colored airships approaching. These airships had slanted patterns of red, white, and yellow emblems. This was the flag of Saga. Upon seeing this scene, Klein suddenly understood what he had overlooked. War might not be initiated by the Lone Kingdom. An ancient and hidden organization definitely had very high-ranking members in other countries. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been able to affect the world situation. Chapter 1083. Backland in Chaos. Although the Sonia Sea wasn't like the Fog Sea, with it often being filled with fog, the northern regions would occasionally fill up with a rather thick fog every autumn and winter morning. Alger Wilson's Blue Avenger was sailing in such an environment, following the borders of the Sonia Island back to the lone coast. He had already spent too long in the North Sonia Sea, so he needed to return for a routine report. Within the pale white fog, the ghost ship quietly proceeded forward, occasionally appearing like a dream that didn't leave any traces. Alger was wrapped by the wind as he stood in midair in front of the window, admiring the white world outside. He allowed his thoughts to wander in different directions. Suddenly, his eyes focused as some silvery white light flashed in his pupils. He saw a large sail through the fog in the distance, and a massive ship silently cruised past. This ship wasn't alone. Behind it were several similar ships. 1, 2, 3. They formed a fleet that spanned a great distance. Saga Sonia Sea Fleet. They've all been mobilized. Where are they heading to? Alger's feet landed on the deck. His gaze immediately turned to the other side, where Sonia Island was located. After the various exchanges at the Tarot Club, Alger was already certain that the world situation was tense, with war about to break out at any moment. At that moment, he made some connections and made a guess. To the Saga Empire and the Lone Kingdom, Sonia Island was extremely important. If it were occupied by the Lone Kingdom, Saga's Eastern Naval Fleet would be completely blocked off in the cold north, unable to vie for any of the various colonies in the Sonia Sea or head to East Balam. Meanwhile, after waging war, if they wanted to threaten the Lone Kingdom's hinterlands, they would have to cross the Amantha mountain range or cross the mid-sea sheer, passing through the defenses of several counties. That would be extremely difficult. And if Sonia Island was conquered by the Saga Empire, then they could use that as a base to attack all the ports in the north and central regions of Lone, including but not limited to Enmat Harbor or Pritz Harbor. If the Saga commander was more daring and unfazed by the losses, he could even be able to directly target the capital of the Lone Kingdom, Backland, which was not far from the port. It was precisely because of this that the two countries had waged the 20-year war. The Saga Empire clinched victory, and they had obtained the crucial southern path. In the Battle of the Violated Oath, Lone had won the war but had failed to regain this territory. Its strategic goals for the war were only half achieved. Alger stared at this scene for a moment before speaking in a serious tone. Is war about to erupt? In Backland, a large number of airships from Saga had entered from North Burrow and arrived above the huge city. As soon as they drew near, the Holy Wind Cathedral seemed to have made certain precautions. The howling of the wind intensified, turning into several giant bluish-black blades that whistled towards the target like surface-to-air missiles. Seeing that the huge blades were about to hit the airbags of the airship, an invisible layer of defense appeared and shielded it from all the attacks. Under the violent strike, the transparent wall shook, but ultimately managed to hold on. At the same time, the compartment for guns, projectile launchers, and cannons of the airship opened up and aimed downwards. Boom! As a hurricane around the Holy Wind Cathedral took form, a loud explosive boom emanated in every direction. In such a terrifying storm, the airships were like boats sailing through the sea where they met mountain-like waves and were about to be tossed into the distance. At that moment, the blood and rust-like beams of light flashed on the leading airship. They enveloped all the other accompanying airships and connected them together. Suddenly, Saga's airship fleet had stabilized in the hurricane and was no longer a puny boat in the gigantic waves. The power of the high-level Red Priest pathway belonged to war, and war was the art of gathering the masses. This was the authority of a war bishop. After the Phasacians blocked this wave of attacks, they took advantage of the gap in between the wave of attacks to deliver their bombs through the hatches and allow them to drop beneath them. And in the hurricane, the trajectories of the bombs became unpredictable. Boom! Boom! The cannon hatches also lit up and showed off their prowess that would honor the god of war. This airship fleet didn't attempt to travel through Backland. After entering North Burrow, it immediately turned to West Burrow, the center of politics for the Lone Kingdom. North Burrow. Backland University of Technology. The withered Intis parasol tree leaves swayed in the wind. Students were either carrying books or bags as they walked around the campus. As a member of an institute of higher education, as the first batch of students of this reorganized university, these young adults were full of vigor. They looked forward to their future and would gather together every day to discuss their ideals, recite poems, and research technology. They were pure and happy. Melissa Moretti walked amidst them as she raised her head to look at the wall clock at the top of the main teaching building and involuntarily hastened her pace. She had to go to Chancellor Moment's office today to prepare for the upcoming mechanical laboratory that was to be officially launched. This was something that she enjoyed greatly, something which made her feel happy every day. She felt that life on campus was so wonderful and that her classmates were so adorable. Subconsciously, Melissa looked at the steam locomotive in the middle of the square. Its massive, complicated body was displaying its infinite charm in the machinery industry. Quite a number of students liked to gather there, knocking, hitting, and analyzing its structure. As for the school, it didn't encourage or forbid it. The corners of Melissa's lips curled into a smile as she moved to look away. Suddenly, a metallic gray object descended from the sky and landed in the middle of the square. Boom! The ground shook violently as all the windows of the main teaching building shattered. If not for the distance, Melissa might have been thrown up by the blast of air. Countless screams rang out, and like the other students, Melissa fled in panic, not knowing what had happened. She was only 16 years old after all. She had never experienced such a scene before. The billowing dust and smoke gradually fell. After hiding behind a tree, Melissa subconsciously looked at the spot where the explosion had just occurred. Her expression instantly froze, and her eyes glazed over. The steam locomotive's head was already in pieces. Its components and fragments were scattered everywhere. The students around it, and those passing by, had already collapsed to the ground, their bodies no longer intact. They were no longer breathing. Some of them were covered in blood, others charred. There were some moaning in pain. This scene was like an oil painting that wasn't realistic enough. Melissa stared at it in a daze, momentarily at a loss for a reaction. Carter. She knew that male student who had a great spirit for research. Every time everyone was in discussion, he would confidently say that he was going to be a ship engineer. Now, he only had half his lower body left, and his intestines were all over the ground. Eudora. She was a student from the same faculty as her. Despite studying machinery, she loved poetry very much and was rather talented in this aspect. She was loved by the people around her. Sometimes, Melissa would also attend their gatherings and quietly listen to Eudora's recital. She felt that this girl was really attractive, but now, her leg was badly mutilated, and she was moaning half-consciously in pain. In just a few seconds, these people's future had been cruelly changed. It was only when many teachers rushed out of the teaching block and started to rescue the injured and evacuate the students that Melissa woke up from her trance and hurriedly moved closer to the teachers. Listen to me. All of you are to split up into 2 groups. One batch will head to the laboratories, and the other to Tiffany Cathedral. They all have an underground area that you can hide in. One of the teachers wore a look of terror, but he still held his breath and made arrangements with his clear voice as though he had been specially trained. He looked around and saw that the students didn't dare to leave the teachers. He hurriedly said, "Don't worry. The enemy's airship has already turned and gone to Westboro. There's no danger here." His words were accompanied by a rumbling explosion that came from the southwest. Westboro. The kingdom's parliament, various departments, and municipal halls are there. Upon hearing the teacher's words, Melissa immediately thought of many things. As the light in her eyes flickered, she suddenly pursed her lips tightly and ran towards the school gate, ignoring her teacher calling from behind. As she moved along a sheltered area, Melissa quickly arrived on the streets. She panted heavily and looked around, trying to get her bearings. At that moment, she saw the subway entrance nearby. Although she was flustered, she still remembered what the teacher had just said. Underground area that you can hide in. Isn't the subway underground? The bombing has just started, and the subway probably hadn't stopped moving. As her thoughts raced, Melissa rushed towards the entrance that showed signs of bombardment. Upon going underground, she realized that the people here weren't as many as she had expected. Most ordinary people who had never been trained wouldn't think of hiding in here immediately. The subway had indeed not stopped moving, but no one was checking the tickets. After a short wait, Melissa ran over, her lips tightly pursed and her face filled with anxiety. After 3 stops, the subway stopped at Kings Avenue. Melissa squeezed through the crowd and rushed out of the carriage. She had already recovered her stamina. She ran along the stairs, her speed increasing ever so slightly before she quickly reached the surface. At this moment, whatever she could see was in a state of chaos. Many buildings had collapsed as they were burning in scarlet flames. Broken limbs, blood, and the dead were everywhere. She could hear cries, screams, and orders. Upon seeing this scene, Melissa became even more anxious as she tried to run towards the 4-story building where the kingdom's Ministry of Finance was located. However, the area had already been sealed. She could see that many window panes had shattered. The walls were riddled with bullet holes, and there were still traces of an explosion. Melissa tried to enter the perimeter but was stopped by the soldiers who were maintaining order. This only served to increase her anxiety as her eyes reddened. At this moment, she saw a familiar figure. It was the black-haired, brown-eyed Benson who wasn't wearing a hat. Upon seeing Melissa, Benson immediately rushed over. He looked anxious and angry as he shouted, "Why are you here? Why aren't you hiding underground? I'm very safe here. Quick, follow me there." "Didn't you not go underground either?" Melissa, who had never been shouted at by her brother, wanted to instinctively retort, but her vision was already blurry. "Phew," after he shouted, he let out a breath and softened his tone. "It's good that you're okay. Quick, don't wander around on the streets." Upon hearing his words, the panic and concern in Melissa's heart calmed down. At this moment, she felt that even if she were to die, it wouldn't be that scary anymore. At least, she wouldn't be the only one left at home. At this moment, a bomb was blown over by a hurricane and was landing towards the area. But suddenly, the bomb changed directions abruptly and flew off horizontally. Boom! It exploded in midair, only stirring up a blast of air. Chapter 1084 The People in War. Boom! Boom! In the building at Sherwood Borough's 17 Minsk Street, the female owner of the building, Stellan Sammer, and her maidservants heard a loud explosion from afar. She fearfully hid in a corner of the room, feeling as though the ground beneath her feet was trembling. Only after the constant terrifying commotion started to fade away did she straighten her body and look left and right with an unusually strained mind. What exactly happened? The 2 maidservants simultaneously shook their heads. They were both at a loss and also afraid. As soon as she left the corner of the room, she instinctively wanted to walk out of the room and talk to her neighbors to figure out what had just happened. However, she was worried that another attack would happen again, so she had no choice but to pace around in the living room. After a few minutes, she suddenly heard the sound of the door opening. She quickly turned her head and realized that her husband, Luke Sammer, had returned with his valet. "Aren't you working?" Stellan asked subconsciously. The stout Luke replied solemnly, "I happened to pass by the vicinity and came back immediately. Quick, put on your coat. Let's go to the cathedral now." "What happened? What happened?" Stellan asked again. Luke took 2 steps forward and said, "Faceax airships are bombarding Backlund." How could this be?" Stellan's eyes widened in disbelief. "Now is not the time to discuss this. Whatever it is, it has already happened. We have to go to the cathedral immediately." Luke gave his wife a hug. "Don't worry too much. I think those airships aren't heading over." All right, Stellan replied in a panic. As she wore the coat the maidservant had brought over, she instinctively said with concern, "What about the children? They're at the church's school, so there will be people who will arrange for them to take shelter." "We don't have the time to reach them," Luke said calmly. "All right." Stellan made a prayer gesture, hoping that the deity she believed in would provide them with protection. The 2 of them, along with their male and female servants, quickly exited their house and walked towards the other end of the street. As she passed by Unit 58, Stellan took a glance and whispered, "Previously, I had laughed at Lawyer Jurgen, saying that he gave up a lot of opportunities in Backlund from moving to the south just because of Mrs. Doris's ailments. Now I'm starting to envy him." Luke shot her a look and said, "Don't worry too much. It'll be fine." While walking quickly, Stellan couldn't help but ask, "Luke, are we fleeing Backlund?" "No, there's no need," Luke Sammer answered firmly. "This was just an accident." Seeing that his wife was clearly confused, he added, "Backlund is the capital of the kingdom, so it has to be the most well-defended area. This time, it was just an oversight that no one expected. The next time, the Phasacians won't have another chance. The kingdom has the strongest military in the northern and southern continents. The Phasacians will definitely be taught a lesson. There's no way they can invade Backlund again. After this, Backlund will definitely be the safest place to be." "I see." Stellan felt that her husband's words made sense, and she was willing to believe him. After the explanation, Luke fell silent for a few seconds. "However, we still have to make some preparations. Once the church announces that we can move freely, we'll immediately fetch the children back and buy more food. We'll buy as much as we can." Inside a public school in the Backlund Bridge area. Due to the distance, Daisy and her classmates didn't realize what had happened in the north and west boroughs, nor did they sense the chaos that had spread from Hillston Borough to Cherwood Borough. However, teachers still came to their classrooms and arranged for them to line up to head to the nearest cathedral. This made Daisy recall the great smog of Backlund last year. Back then, they had also been asked to hide in the cathedral beside the school. Did something similar happen again? The trauma in Daisy's heart made her tremble slightly as she felt intense sadness and anger. When she passed by the door, she couldn't help but turn her head to look at the teacher in charge and ask, "Is it another disaster?" Maybe. The teacher didn't know the details and had only followed the orders sent by a telegram. "Is there a disaster like this every year, or maybe even more than one?" Daisy asked with a slightly ethereal voice with a tinge of innocence. The teacher looked at her with pity and shook his head. "All difficulties will pass. God will protect everyone." Daisy didn't waste his time and followed the crowd to the nearest cathedral in a somewhat blank manner. North Borough, 22 Phelps Street. After hearing the explosion inside the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation, the first thing Audrey did was to conceal her dragon scales before rushing to the window. Seeing the airships with the Faceac flag appearing in the air and the bombs being carried away by a hurricane and being thrown into the distance, either landing on the ground and exploding or disappearing as though they had entered the spirit world, a thought flashed across her mind. The words that the world Mr. Gehrman Sparrow had said, as well as the mission of the psychology alchemists. She came to a realization. War had truly erupted. She immediately turned her head and said to the huge golden retriever Susie, her personal lady's maid, Annie, and the others, "Quick, hide in St. Samuel Cathedral." Although Audrey didn't know how to deal with an air raid, the education she received from a young age told her to go to a cathedral as soon as possible if she ever encountered danger. In fact, she instinctively wanted to rush back to Empress Borough to protect her mother. However, considering that Annie, the other servants and staff were ordinary people who lacked experience and the ability to deal with Xueqi crisis, she had no choice but to take care of them and accompany them to St. Samuel Cathedral. In order to resolve any dangers that she might encounter along the way, she planned to put on hand of horror and lie. On the one hand, she could distort the trajectory of bullets, while on the other hand, she could control flames and trigger the bombs in advance. In the face of long-range attacks, the beyonder powers of the spectator pathway were indeed not effective. While secretly protecting her servants and the Foundation staff, she successfully entered St. Samuel Cathedral and saw a few bishops and priests approaching her. "Miss Audrey, you don't have to worry about the Earl and his wife, as well as Lord Hibbert. They have people to protect them. An air raid like this won't harm them. Besides, you also know how grand your family basement is and how strong it is." One of the bishops quickly brought her to the side to console her. After taking off her fishnet gloves, she nodded and acknowledged the words of the bishop. She was no longer in a hurry to return home and instead asked, "What's the current situation like?" "The Phaeacians have lost 2 airships and have moved towards Westborough. Don't worry, all the defenses have been mustered. They won't cause any further damage." After a simple exchange of words, the bishop led Audrey's group towards the underground area of the cathedral. And further below was where the Nighthawks were active. 160 Buckland Street. Butler Walter and a group of servants hid in an underground area which was used as a wine cellar. This was done under Dwayne Dantes' orders, and this gentleman had headed out to find Bishop Electra with his valet. After an unknown period of time, Walter and company heard a knock on the door. Through the peephole, they confirmed that their employer had returned. "There aren't any more raids now, but it's best you hide at St. Samuel Cathedral for a while," Klein said as he surveyed the area. "Yes, sir," Walter replied on behalf of the servants before asking, "And after that?" As a qualified butler, he often read the papers and understood that the situation was tense. It wasn't difficult to guess that a war would break out after the explosions. Klein thought for a moment before saying, "Once the church has verified the situation, we'll head to Mager Manor. You can bring your family along. No matter what, the capital of the kingdom is definitely a relatively safe place. And the manor at the periphery of the capital definitely wouldn't be a target of air raids, as it's of no value. Yes, there's enough food in Mager Manor, and there's a large supply of wine. Even if the war were to be extended for a long time, we won't have to worry about starving to death." Upon hearing the employer's words, the servants who had already formed a family immediately revealed looks of delight, wiping away their pale looks of fear. Walter expressed his gratitude directly. He said with some deliberation, "You can buy more food. Under such circumstances, no one will find it excessive. Also, there might not be any more attacks near Backland, but I can't say the same for security. The manor outside the city must be on guard." Klein nodded. "I've also considered this. I'll discuss this with Member of Parliament Mocht and military personnel about purchasing a batch of decommissioned weapons and bullets. You must practice more. Anyway, during this period of time, Anuni and I will return to Backland to handle certain matters according to the situation. If there's anything I haven't considered, I'll make up for it later." As for the food, he didn't forbid Butler Walter from buying it. This way, if a famine really happened, he would have the ability to save them. After discussing the follow-up procedures, everyone in the residence of Dwayne Dantes packed up their luggage and brought their valuables. They followed their employer into St. Samuel Cathedral and arrived underground. With a single glance, he saw Audrey walking amidst the people, placating their moods. He smiled and nodded at her. Upon seeing Dwayne Dantes, Audrey smiled back and confirmed that nothing major had happened from his attitude. Furs and Zio had moved again, but they were still at the borders of East Borough, and they were even closer to the Backland Bridge area. After waking up naturally, Furs rubbed her hair and walked out of the bedroom to prepare lunch. As she looked around, she saw Zio, who had gone out early, sitting on a chair and flipping through the newspapers. "What's wrong?" Furs asked blankly. Zio frowned and said, "The Phaeacians' air raids bombed North and West Borough." "What?" Furs first blurted out before recalling the matters that had been discussed at the Tarot Club. At that moment, a paperboy's voice came from outside. "Extra! Extra! The kingdom declares war on Faysac. Extra! Extra! The kingdom declares war on Faysac." Chapter 1085 Scrutinizing the Situation, Extra! Extra! The kingdom declares war on Faysac. On the way from Mager Manor to Backland, Klein heard the paperboy shouting on the streets with brisk steps while on a horse carriage. Although he had already made preparations, He still sighed after confirming that the war had truly erupted. He couldn't help but feel depressed again. The grudge from having Sonia Island, a key territory, taken away. The conflict over the rights of the colonies. The defeat from the previous war. The political corruption leading to a recession. Ever since the repeal of the Grain Act, many farmers of the kingdom have gone bankrupt due to the importing of foreign food products. The lower class live in abject conditions. The rich-poor divide only grew deeper. The middle class's blind confidence in the lone kingdom's might, and the eager desire to raise their own positions. The intensifying conflict between different political factions in high society leading to a fracture. The king and his faction wish for a large-scale war. With all these factors combined, just from an objective standpoint, and considering this from the angle of materialism, it's almost inevitable for Lone to start a war. Reality is the best author. Jumping out from his experience from the past, Klein scrutinized the Lone Kingdom situation from a fresh point of view. He realized that the tides of the times had already formed and were surging over. Without a true deity's descent, it was completely unstoppable. In comparison, what puzzled him more was why the Faysac Empire would be willing to initiate a war. Even if the members of an ancient secret organization were indeed members of the upper echelons of Faysac or the Church of the God of Combat, key figures who had the right to make the decision, there was no way they could be alone in deciding such an important matter. How could the others agree to a world war? Could it be that the conflict between the various classes in the Faysac Empire has also completely escalated to the point that it urgently needs a war? With his lack of understanding of the Empire of the North, it was difficult for Klein to make an accurate judgment. But they just won the East Balam War and reaped more of the rights to the colonies. There's no reason for its situation to be more serious than Lone's. Yes, the royal family, the Einhorn family, is in control of the Red Priest pathway. It's understandable that they crave war, but the Church of the God of Combat has no reason not to stop it. As a member of the Orthodox Deity Alliance, they lacked the motivation to help Amon's brother advance to Sequence 0. Thinking of this, Klein suddenly came up with a theory. Did that brother of Amon realize that the goddess has already acquired the uniqueness of the death pathway, and is in a critical stage? So he revealed this information to the Church of the God of Combat. And the God of Combat is in a neighboring pathway with the goddess, so there's no way he can ignore this matter. He will definitely make an intense response. Of course, it might not be done by the brother of Amon. It might also be because of the numinous episcopate's artificial death faction's angel, Hater. After being warned by Einham Sauron Medici, this conspirer expert, Heap discovered the abnormalities ahead of time. On the one hand, Heap pretends not to notice anything and continues to set up a probe. On the other hand, Heap pulled in the Church of the God of Combat to worsen the situation and make it more chaotic. The Red Angel evil spirit is truly a symbol of war. If this is really the case, then it's inevitable for Faysac to wage this war. Furthermore, the matter regarding the uniqueness of the death pathway has no room for compromise. At the critical moment, the God of Combat might descend, causing a battle of gods that hasn't happened since the end of the Fourth Epoch to happen. This time, for the airship fleet from Faysac could stealthily to travel from the coast for nearly 100 kilometers without being detected, it would definitely have a weather warlock providing protection. Otherwise, even if they were to take a detour across places with few people, they'll still be seen ahead of time and definitely be stopped by the lone airships. A weather warlock is an angel. Since the Fifth Epoch, the number of wars that have Beyonders at this level are few and far between. After Emperor Rosel's death, most soldiers don't even know of Beyonders, even in the colonial wars. To have a weather warlock be involved in this means, this is really a battle that will sweep through the entire world. It involves battles at all levels. Is this what Amon's brother wants? When the time comes, the Lord of Storms, the eternal blazing sun, the Earth Mother, the God of Steam and Machinery, the God of Knowledge and Wisdom will have to take their respective stances. Would the conflicts that they have temporarily suppressed for almost 2,000 years be escalated? Earth Mother likes the giants, and even amongst her blessed, they are Phasacians. And because of the splitting of Lenberg, Mason and Seeger, these made the Fainapotter kingdom bear a bone-deep grudge with the Lone Kingdom and Intis. The king's powers and the divine powers are highly likely to be unified, and they might form an alliance with Faysac. From the south to the north, they will attack Lone and Intis. Of course, countries like Lenberg and the Church of Knowledge, who are in the crossfire, will definitely try to stop it. As for Desi Bay, Fainapotter, and the Lone Kingdom are directly connected, the south wouldn't be peaceful either. The more Klein thought about it, the more he felt that the situation in the northern continent would become abnormally chaotic. And no matter what direction it developed into, he couldn't stop it. Even if he were a Sequence 4 demigod, under the tide of the times, there was no way for him to cause any major impact in this battle of gods, or exert any key influence. It would be pretty good if he could protect himself and the people he cared about. Previously, when the Faesac air fleet attacked, the first thing he did was arrange for Butler Walter and company to hide in the underground area that was used as a wine cellar. Then, he teleported to Backlund University of Technology. At that time, a bomb had already hit the ground. Some had died, and others were injured. The only thing he was thankful for was that his sister Melissa wasn't within the vicinity of the explosion. By the time Melissa and Benson met, the airships from Faesac didn't stay for long and quickly retreated from Backlund. Only then did he return to Dwayne Dantes' residence. Phew! Klein let out a slow sigh of relief. He turned his head to look out the window and saw that, after hearing that the kingdom was declaring war on Faesac, a small number of pedestrians on the street wore a look of horror as though they had recalled the air raid in the morning. Most of them wore blank expressions with a look of panic. They had no idea what they could do even if they wanted to. They might not have truly understood what this war would bring, but they instinctively felt that peace had been broken. The future was a chaotic mess, fraught with danger. Klein retracted his gaze and looked at his valet, Anuni, who was sitting opposite him. From his eyes, he realized that he was somewhat at a loss. He gave a half-smile and sighed. He raised his hand to rub his temples and wiped away his depressed and helpless feelings. He thought about what he could do and what he needed to take note of. No matter what, with this experience and lesson, the king's faction has had a war spark out as they wished. Before all of Lone collapses, it's nearly impossible for Faesac to invade Backlund again. It would be safer for Benson and Melissa to stay here. What's most worrisome is the lack of food and various assassinations. The latter is nothing. The place where Melissa and Benson live in is decided by their own levels. They aren't anywhere close to coming into contact with someone important who is a target for assassination, so they won't be implicated. Fortunately, Portland Moments Research Laboratory has just been established, and there are no results from it yet. It won't become a target that must be destroyed. As for the former, I can provide some help through Miss Audrey. The Winter County at the Holy Cathedral is located in the far north reaches of the kingdom, next to Faesac. It's always the front line of every war. Ma'am Ariana might have returned to help the military. Oh, she might also be sent elsewhere to protect the coast. After all, the defenses of Backlund are sufficient. The royal family definitely has grade 0 sealed artifacts and also angels. The three churches most likely have hidden tricks up their sleeves. In that case, my greatest pillar of support is gone. At most, I can get some help from the church and use some sealed artifacts. In the past, I wasn't too worried about the effects the Red Angel Evil Spirit's return has on me. Now, I have to raise my guard for this matter. Patrick Bryan knows very well that Dwayne Dantes is equivalent to Gehrman Sparrow, who is equivalent to the Blessed of Death. I had intentionally revealed this information, hoping that it would direct the points of suspicion to Mr. Azek, the Death Consul. And now, this also means that the Red Angel Evil Spirit would be able to grasp this information in no time. The Red Angel Evil Spirit currently only has a high level, but his actual standard shouldn't have recovered to the level of an angel. There's no irreconcilable feud between him and me, nor do I have what he wants. Even if he knows that Dantes is equivalent to Gehrman Sparrow, it would be very unlikely for him to deal with me directly. Other than attacking me directly, what harm will it bring after he grasps the situation? Is he using this to set up a conspiracy or sell the intelligence to someone who needs it? What conspiracy? Who would want it? Many thoughts and names surfaced in his mind, but they were quickly eliminated by him. This included Amon's brother and the Angel of Fate Ouroboros. From the Red Angel Evil Spirit's past actions, for the time being, he wouldn't make contact with Rose Redemption, and Amon's brother is a sworn enemy of Medici and company. Suddenly, a name appeared in his mind. Zeratul. The leader of the Secret Order, the Sequence 1 Seer Pathway Angel, Zeratul, who had returned to normalcy after becoming mad. According to Rhodes's feedback, this powerful and concealed existence had already left his original location, and his whereabouts were unknown. Previously, Klein had been wondering if he would come to Backlund due to the law of beyonder characteristic convergence. Medici and the Zeratul and Zoroast families were serving under the Solomon Empire. Even if they weren't friendly with each other, they must be very familiar with each other. In the Foggy Town, Zeratul had met Gehrman Sparrow. If he really wants to pursue something, he would definitely chase after the crazy adventurer. With a thought in his mind, Klein instinctively began to assume that Zeratul was in Backland in search of Gehrman Sparrow, and with that, he began to analyze the situation for other abnormalities. At almost the same instant that he thought of something, Klein recalled the failure of the joint operation between Sharon and the Sanguine. The Rose school of thought is also looking for Gehrman Sparrow, so would Zeratul, who received the corresponding news, work with them? Back then, the operation was on the brink of success. The Rose school of thought's person in charge in Backland had left in a hurry. Clearly, he had only noticed the problem at the last moment. With the Sanguine preparing the corresponding sealed artifact, it's rather impossible for such a failure to happen. Even the Sanguine Duke was puzzled and confused, but what if it was thanks to the perceptive intuition of a Sequence 1 angel of the seer pathway? This would explain it perfectly. Back then, Zeratul was sitting opposite the Rose school of thought's Backland person in charge. The Rose school of thought retreated in a panic and had even deliberately left behind a doll to create moonlight and cleanse everything so as to cover up the existence of Zeratul. Also, the fact that Gehrman Sparrow has a certain relationship with the Death Consul isn't a secret. Will Zeratul spread out all his marionettes and sense if there's the power of death in Backland? Previously, when Patrick Bryan was holding rituals, there was actually Zeratul's marionette watching him. If the Red Angel evil spirit has already sold the intelligence to Zeratul, then wouldn't my returning to Baklund Street in such a chaotic situation be giving myself up? His pupils constricted, and he immediately said to the coachman in front, "Just stop here. I suddenly thought of something else I need to settle." After he said that, he felt extremely tense, afraid that the coachman wouldn't answer him and continue driving. Fortunately, none of this happened. The horse carriage stopped by the side of the road, and with his valet Anuni, Klein walked towards a small alley nearby. Immediately following that, he snapped his fingers and allowed the scarlet flames to emerge from his pocket, covering both himself and his marionette. He had to rush to St. Samuel Cathedral as soon as possible in a concealed manner. With a flash of flames, their two figures disappeared. However, after completing a leap, the flames within his senses suddenly disappeared. All of them. A spacious living room appeared in front of him. On an ordinary reclining chair was a tall and thin man. He was young and had southern continent blood in him. He looked rather handsome and appeared a little anemic. The Red Angel evil spirit, Sauron Einha Medici. This Red Angel played with a ball of scarlet red flames in his hand as the corners of his mouth curled up. "You actually sensed it earlier than I expected. Heh, using flaming jump in front of me." Chapter 1086. A simple inference. The moment he saw the Red Angel evil spirit, Klein's pupils dilated. The human-skinned glove on his left hand suddenly turned transparent. He didn't listen to what the other party had to say. His instinctive reaction was to immediately teleport away, but at this moment, the spirit world that entered his eyes was different from usual. Countless transparent creatures in indescribable forms were all dyed in a color that was a mixture of iron and blood. The surrounding area was filled with thick smoke, and there were 7 rays of light that contained infinite knowledge hidden above them. It was almost impossible to see them. Klein's heart skipped a beat. He didn't rashly teleport. Upon seeing this, the Red Angel evil spirit chuckled. "What are you afraid of, Zeratul?" Upon hearing this, Klein subconsciously looked around, but he didn't discover anything unusual. The Red Angel evil spirit maintained that annoying smile and pointed to the sofa opposite the reclining chair. "If I had already informed him that Dwayne Dantes is Gehrman Sparrow, and that you will return to 160 Baklund Street in the morning, then the person waiting in the wine cellar wouldn't be a living person. Instead, it would be your hung-up butler and servants, looking as though they were ham left to dry age. Of course, they would similarly welcome you warmly. Sit. Under such circumstances, listening to my thoughts and intentions first isn't a bad thing." He imagined the scene described by the Red Angel evil spirit. Although Klein had done similar things himself, his hair stood on end, and he was horrified. He kept his guard up, allowing the marionette, Konas Kilgore, in the form of Dwayne Dantes to sit on the sofa while he waited by the side as though he was his personal servant, Anuni. He had unknowingly swapped places with his marionette and instantly changed their appearances. Perhaps it's because you just learned of this information from Patrick Bryan, and you haven't even informed Zeratul yet? Klein retorted through his marionette. At the same time, he determined from the words of the Red Angel evil spirit that Zeratul had really come to Baklund. This was a complete and unrestricted, terrifying, and bizarre sequence. One angel. It was enough to be called a hidden existence. The Red Angel evil spirit's gaze swept across the valet and his master before smiling. I'll be able to get something I want to know in 15 minutes from a fool like Patrick Bryan. Furthermore, an entire night and a morning has passed since the ritual. You and Miss Messenger might have something in common. Klein made the marionette raise his eyebrows. And so? The Red Angel evil spirit gently rocked the reclining chair it was in. I'm not sure if you've heard of such a saying. When you choose a beyonder pathway, your corresponding friends and enemies will be determined. As for us, we aren't friends, but we aren't enemies either. Of course, you did have some conflicts with me, but no one suffered any great losses. The matter has passed. To me, your growth will bring great trouble to a few people I hate, so I don't want to kill you in advance. I'm happy to see you continue your advancement. The Emperor had said similar words. A few people he hates. Klein deliberated and asked, Blasphemer Amon? Not that ignorant and not that stupid either. The Red Angel evil spirit laughed and stroked his chin. Be it his words or actions, he gave people the urge to hit him. After some thought, Klein calmly pointed out a question. Then you can definitely choose Zeratul. If he can rise up because of this, he will similarly bring about extreme trouble for Blasphemer Amon. Compared to him, I'm still too weak. I'll still need a long time to grow. There are too many possible accidents from this point forth. The Red Angel evil spirit nodded seriously. Indeed, that's what I thought in the beginning as well. A fellow like you, who isn't much stronger than a wild dog, what are you going to use to compete with the already sequence 1 Zeratul? Die faster than anyone else? At this point, the Red Angel evil spirit changed the topic and sighed. However, if one can choose the most ideal proposal in this world, that would be too wonderful. Before he could finish his sentence, a bloody gash appeared on his left bloody cheek. The wound opened up in a wide manner, opening and closing like a mouth, and revealed 2 rows of illusory white teeth. I've investigated. The collapse of the Sauron family was caused by Zeratul and Roselle. Is this the spirit left behind by the ancestor of the Sauron family? The dissociation of the Red Angel is worse than I imagined. No, this isn't considered a normal split personality, but 3 people being stuffed into one body. No matter what they do, they have to first come to a unanimous decision, or there will be internal strife. Klein believed that the Red Angel evil spirit wasn't setting up a trap, but that he had no way of informing Zeratul of the relevant information. This is his weakness. I can use it in the future. Klein muttered silently before asking, Then why did you come to me? Just to say those words? The Red Angel evil spirit raised its hand to rub his left cheek, causing the mouth that appeared to slowly disappear. At the same time he smiled and said, Aren't you investigating the lone royal family? It seems to involve a high-ranking demoness named Katarina. If you have any tracks from her, inform me before you carry out any operation. Saintess of White Katarina. Why is the Red Angel evil spirit looking for her? The Hunter Pathway Sequence 4 can cause women to become men. The Sequence 7 of the Demoness Pathway can make men into women. This should be 2 separate Beyonder pathways that can be interchanged. The Red Angel evil spirit can't find a suitable Hunter Pathway Beyonder characteristic, so it plans to jump to the Demoness Pathway? That's right. As an evil spirit, as long as he resolves his issue of survival, he can still advance using potions and characteristics. Klein was first taken aback before he used the secrets he knew of to come up with a guess. He suddenly had a strange idea. When there are both high-sequence Beyonder characteristics of the Hunter and Demoness pathways within a body, would the Red Angel evil spirit display a male form or a female form? Whoever has a higher level and is in charge decides. At that moment, the Red Angel evil spirit looked at Dwayne Dantes and his valet and scoffed. You have a great talent for provoking others. I haven't said anything. Klein inwardly replied in a daze. The Red Angel evil spirit curled his lips and said, I can guess what you're thinking, unless you admit that you're ignorant. However, this might be a good thing for them. Shut up. A bloody mouth appeared on both sides of the Red Angel evil spirit's cheeks. Looking at the dissociative identity disorder happening before him, Klein rationally gave up on the idea of going deeper into the topic and said, It's not impossible to inform you in advance, but the problem is how should I inform you? From his point of view, the demoness of unaging Katarina was a vile person. It was the same with the Red Angel evil spirit. It wasn't a bad thing to have them clash. The Red Angel Evil Spirit smiled and said, "Of course it's by reciting my honorific name. The great god of war, the symbol of iron and blood, the ruler of chaos and strife." Pooey. The mouth on both sides of the Red Angel Evil Spirit's cheeks let out a disdainful sound, as though they didn't approve of it. This is a standard deity's honorific name. After gaining control of the uniqueness, to a certain extent, Medici had already become a quasi-god? And as long as no one can accommodate the uniqueness of the Red Priest pathway, this evil spirit's level will not drop? The honorific name will always point towards him? Klein nodded thoughtfully and probed. "What do you know about the secret ruins of Blood Emperor Alista Tudor?" Upon hearing this name, the Red Angel's facial muscles twitched slightly before sneering. "Are you asking what the secret of the lone royal family is? You might not know this, but you might be familiar with the Blood Emperor's secret ruins," Klein said deliberately. The Red Angel Evil Spirit suddenly laughed out loud and slapped the armrest of the reclining chair. "Your tricks are so childish that they look like a 3-year-old's. Haha, the secret hidden by the lone royal family is very simple. I could guess it just by reading the newspapers. TSK, you only have a smart-looking face. Your brain is filled with squirming worms. You can guess it just by reading the newspapers?" Klein frowned and asked. The Red Angel Evil Spirit finished laughing and curled his lips. "Of course, it needs some basic knowledge. I believe you should have it. How about this? I'll ask you a few questions, and you'll understand how simple the answer is. Is that Blood Emperor secret ruins the kind known by the churches?" "No." Klein shook his head firmly. The Red Angel Evil Spirit smiled and continued asking, "Do you know which sequence the Blood Emperor, Alista Tudor, was in before he advanced to Sequence 0? "The Black Emperor pathway, Sequence 1 Prince of Abolition," Klein calmly replied. The Red Angel Evil Spirit nodded slightly. "Did you know that before Alista Trunsoist became Blood Emperor, he was one of the 2 consuls of the Tudor Trunsoist United Empire, and that the ones supporting him were 6 of the 7 present deities, including Evernight and Storm?" Klein nodded and gave an affirmative answer. The half-slumped Red Angel Evil Spirit crossed one leg over the other. "Then do you know that, after Alista became Blood Emperor, he had truly gone mad and even died during the Battle of the Gods?" "Kind of." Klein didn't dare to be too sure, because this was something he had read from Roselle's diary, and the Emperor had learned it from Mr. Dorr. The Red Angel Evil Spirit chuckled and said, "Then do you think that Alista Tudor would have the rationality and opportunity to leave behind secret ruins after he became Blood Emperor?" "No." Klein slowly shook his head. The Red Angel Evil Spirit spread its hands and said, "Since it's a ruin left behind by Alista before he became Blood Emperor, and if the 6 deities who supported him aren't aware of it, what could it be? If you had a choice, would you take a path destined to go mad?" This. Klein instantly thought of the 9 mausoleums that the Black Emperor needed in the ritual needed to become a god. To a Prince of Abolition, before the return of the former Black Emperor, secretly seeking out a way to advance to Black Emperor was something he wanted to do. "Is that ruin related to the Black Emperor?" Klein asked in a deep voice. The Red Angel Evil Spirit rubbed his chin and chuckled. "You seem to know the Black Emperor's ritual. Isn't that simple? What has the King of Lone been doing in the past 2 to 3 years? The Grain Act was abolished. There's the Civil Servant Unified Examination, a restructuring of the military, the House of Lords and Nobles are struck down a notch, strengthening the authority of the House of Commons. Isn't this something that was published in the newspapers? Besides, isn't it common knowledge that the Justiciar pathway can be switched to the Black Emperor pathway?" As many of these things were the trends of the times to Klein, with one of them being pushed by him, he had never considered them from a mysticism perspective in the past. Now that they were connected, he immediately understood. Soon, he recalled something else. The last person who wanted to become Black Emperor was Roselle. He happened to be related to Amon's brother. Chapter 1087 The Deities' Attitudes. The Grain Act was abolished. The Civil Servant Unified Examination. A concession was made, bringing the Church's forces into the military. These seem to be in line with the trends of the times, but in essence, they're oppressive, weakening the nobles, and supporting a new class. Compared to the previous 1,000-year rule, this can really be considered to be against the norm. It's the order needed to become Black Emperor. In the past decade or so, the changes in architecture style have been very drastic as well. For Roselle to be able to obtain the uniqueness and obtain the corresponding sequence 1 beyond a characteristic, That ancient secret organization must have put in quite a bit of effort. It might have even provided part of it directly. When this emperor perished, who took away those characteristics? Also, Bernadette has been in Backlund for the past few months and has been coming here frequently. Sigh, the main issue is that the asymmetrical aesthetics of the empires in the Fourth Epoch had affected my understanding, making me believe that rules that violate normal circumstances are odd and against the order that humans would strive for. Now that I think about it again, what does it mean by normal circumstances? Isn't it just something that everyone has already gotten used to and therefore won't have an instinctive sense of resistance towards it? From the tribes to the countries, from feudalism to republicanism, don't they all violate the normal circumstances of the period they were in, with countless people wishing to return to the past? The phrase old fogies and leftovers from the old dynasties encompasses this problem. From the looks of it, as long as a deity doesn't intervene, the revolution that the Black Emperor needs will definitely happen. It's just a matter of time. With the tides of the times surging over, it's really hard to stop it. That brother of Amon is indeed a powerful and terrifying author. In the depths of the Blood Emperor's ruins, there should be a mausoleum similar to a pyramid. And according to the ritual requirements, one has to drive one's citizens to build it. Therefore, there are cases of people going missing in the East Borough and overseas slave trade. When the war develops to a certain stage, using the excuse of praying for victory, or the nation's mourning for soldiers, a huge gathering with a large number of citizens can be convened to participate in the sacrificial ritual in the various cities in the royal capital. Yes. Many years ago, the lone royal family obtained the crown of the Balam Empire, and they connected the king's name to the title of emperor. What a great plan! When he was alerted by the Red Angel evil spirit's questions, Klein's mind tensed up. Many thoughts flashed through his mind, and at the same time, he had another question. He looked at the tall, thin, young gatekeeper who didn't look rosy. He said after some deliberation, George III wishes to directly become Black Emperor? But he isn't even at Sequence 4. Even if George III could act ahead of time to make himself more talented and reduce the impact caused by the mental imprint in the potion, Klein didn't believe that a Sequence 5 Beyonder could become a god directly. Unless he was lucky enough with that very slim chance of success. And such luck wasn't something that could be described simply as being sufficient. The Snake of Mercury who represents fate, Willow Septon, didn't even dare to directly devour the die of probability, and he had to seriously find a way to accommodate it. The Red Angel evil spirit scoffed when he heard that. How do you know that George III is only Sequence 5? How are you so sure that the George III under investigation is the real George III? Could it be that he was imagined into existence, or could it be a faceless at the angel level? These are truly very difficult things to accomplish, but to a certain zealot, these are all within the scope of one's ability and the resources in one's grasp. I suspect that George III is an official member of the secret organization that was created to mimic our Rose redemption. His true level might already be at the angel level. Heh, I wouldn't be surprised if he is already at Sequence 1. This, Emperor Roselle once said that the members of that ancient secret organization are all important figures that he couldn't imagine. When they combine forces, other than dealing with the 7 churches, there's nothing that can't be done. This actually includes the king of a country? That's right, later on, the emperor also became the ruler of Intis. Zealot. Is this what the Red Angel evil spirit thinks of Amon's brother? Although this is clearly a little extreme, with a strong bias, there's a certain reason for it. A nickname isn't given randomly. Klein made his marionette frown slightly. You seem to be able to see through the truth of this matter easily. But why hasn't the Church of Evernight, Storm, and Steam realized this problem? Their understanding of the Black Emperor is no less than yours. After all, the 2 churches of the Evernight and the Storm had supported the Tudor Trunsoist United Empire. The Red Angel evil spirit wore an amused expression again as Heap sized up Dwayne Dantes and his valet. How old are you? Why are you still so naive and childish? The 6 deities and the 6 churches are not necessarily equivalent at times. The things the 6 deities know might not be told to the angels and saints beneath them. The Red Angel evil spirit let out a chortle again when Heap saw that Dwayne Dantes was still frowning in confusion. Trust me, what I said and what I'll be saying next is undoubtedly a form of provocation to ruin the image of the 6 deities, but you can consider whether it's the truth. Let's put it this way. In regards to someone wanting to become the Black Emperor, the attitude of the 6 deities, the 7 deities is rather ambiguous. They often have conflicts of their own. More precisely, they are happy to see a mentally sound Black Emperor be born, but they also wish that it's one they'd support. Therefore, they will not give any detailed revelations to the various churches. They will only follow the normal procedure and deliver punishment if there are results to the investigation. Otherwise, they will tacitly approve of its development. Of course, during this process, we cannot eliminate the possibility that a certain existence might want to do some damage, but it will not be so direct and obvious, because it will definitely be stopped by the other deities. If it wasn't because he knew of them taking such attitudes, how could George III dare take the risk? All right, now that the war has broken out, he has overcome the crisis. He can wait for the next opportunity. At that moment, Klein thought of the news that had been leaked out during the operation launched at the Blood Emperor ruins. He was momentarily unsure if he should suspect that the upper echelons of the three churches had a member of the ancient secret organization, or that a certain deity had personally reminded Amon's brother. And if it were the latter, the suspect was undoubtedly not the Lord of Storms. After a moment of silence, Klein hesitantly asked, "So, as long as nothing goes wrong, George III will carry out the ritual to become a god, despite everything that he has done? And if everything goes smoothly and he survives the backlash from the potion, will he ascend to the throne of Black Emperor?" The Red Angel Evil Spirit replied in a relaxed tone, "Is there a problem? Why would the 7 deities?" Klein couldn't help but ask. The Red Angel Evil Spirit sked and said, "Do you want to know? If you want to know, I can tell you now." Just as he was about to say of course, Klein suddenly recalled the warning that Mam Ariana had given him. There are some things that make it easier to be infected the more you know. Both your body and soul will be infected. Once you become an angel, you can seek out the exact answer. As these thoughts flashed through his mind, Klein made his marionette smile. "Forget it then. Very good. You nearly died out of curiosity and foolishness." The Red Angel Evil Spirit shook his head regretfully. He then looked out the window and said, "If there's nothing else, you may leave." "All right." Klein made the marionette stand up and raise his right hand. At this moment, the half-slumped Red Angel Evil Spirit suddenly asked, "I have this nagging feeling that if I had attacked you just now, you wouldn't be completely helpless, am I right?" "Of course. Why do you think I chose flaming jump instead of teleporting?" "That was to hide the burning of the paper crane in my wallet. This way, Snake of Fate Will Osepton's gaze would silently land on me. If anything happens, he would use the yesterday once more charm. To deal with an existence at your level, one can't be too careful. How could one not be careful and keep a trump card hidden?" Klein didn't directly answer the Red Angel Evil Spirit's question. He smiled and expressed his tacit agreement. "Pah!" He snapped his fingers, causing scarlet flames to surge out of his pocket and envelop him. As the scarlet streams dispersed, Klein's figure disappeared in front of the Red Angel Evil Spirit. Backlund, at Dr. Aaron Series's home, in a black pram. The chubby baby rubbed his eyes and muttered silently, "Backlund really isn't suitable for children to live in." 39 Backlund Street. Having done a divination, Klein saw Member of Parliament Mocht, who was about to head to Westborough. "Didn't you go to Mager Manor?" "I'm planning on letting Rihanna and Hazel hide in Moose Manor." Mocht pinched the sockets of his eyes. "I wonder when this side effect will disappear." Klein retracted his gaze from this action and sighed. "I have to prepare some weapons for the manor, so I came to seek your help. Also, if you have the means to get food, you can help me buy some." In his opinion, the low-level citizens weren't able to stock up on food because they didn't have any money at all. At most, they would stock up a few days' worth of food. Therefore, his purchase wouldn't affect them for the time being. Once the food situation worsened, he could donate more of it through Miss Audrey. Before food rationing was implemented, if Klein didn't stockpile, other rich people would do so. Furthermore, they might not donate it. "No problem," Mocht agreed without any hesitation. Klein didn't ask about the price, because he had given housekeeper Tanaja a total of £5,000 for such matters. Of course, after confirming that Zeratul was in Backlund and that Dwayne Dante's being equivalent to Gairman Sparrow was known to the Red Angel Evil Spirit, he decided not to return to Mager Manor. He planned on changing his identity so as not to affect the innocent. As for the excuse, it had been arranged by the Church of Evernight that he would perform certain tasks and that he was unable to return for a long period of time. If there was a charity event that required his help, he gave Miss Audrey the authority to stand in his place. Chapter 1088 Hiding in Seeker. On the way to St. Samuel Cathedral from Backlund Street, Klein passed by the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation at 22 Phelps Street. He was surprised to find that the door was still open. As the initiator and current director, he placed quite a bit of concern over this matter. He temporarily slowed down and walked over. Just as he entered the door, he saw Miss Audrey walking down from the second floor with her personal maidservant, a big golden retriever, and a few staff members beside her. Good afternoon. In this situation, there doesn't seem to be a need to insist on doing anything. Klein went forward and voiced out his doubts. Audrey held the newspaper in her hand as she looked at Dwayne Dantes. Some of our beneficiaries were injured in the air raid. I just went to visit them and arranged for follow-up treatment. The noble lady's eyes were slightly red, as though she had seen all sorts of heart-wrenching scenes in the hospital. May the goddess bless them. Klein came to a realization and drew a crimson moon on his chest. He took the opportunity to say the idea that he had come up with long ago. I plan to donate some more money to buy food, medicine, and medical equipment for the foundation. In this man-made disaster, we can do more things. A brilliant idea. Those who are suffering will be grateful to you from the bottom of their hearts, Mr. Dantes. Audrey tapped her chest 4 times in a fluid motion. There was obvious joy and pity in her eyes. I will do my best as well. She didn't want to just donate money, but to spearhead certain matters. Klein nodded. You don't have to praise me. At times like these, I only did what I should do. Apart from donating funds, I will also donate food. All of you can discuss this directly with my butler, Walter. Yes, Miss Audrey, I can write a letter of authorization to you now so that you can use my name to transfer the resources of Mager Manor. What about you, Mr. Dantes? Audrey asked with a vague guess. This was the most normal response in such a conversation. I received a notice from the church that I need to help them perform certain tasks. As for what they are, I haven't gone to St. Samuel Cathedral yet, so I'm not sure either. The only thing I can confirm is that I have to travel around. I won't be able to return to Mager Manor for a long time. Klein gave the reason he had come up with previously. Miss Audrey, during this period of time at the foundation, I have come to understand your character and ability. Your background and standing also determine your visions and style. Handing these matters to you is the best solution I can come up with. Klein didn't expect his lies to fool a senior spectator. He only wanted to deceive the people around Justice. Oh, these people didn't include the dog. Does Mr. World want to temporarily give up on his identity as Dwayne Dantes so that he can perform certain matters in secret? Feeling enlightened, Audrey pretended to think. After a few seconds of silence she said, with the current situation, I can't refuse such a request. Klein secretly heaved a sigh of relief. He immediately got his personal servant Anuni to go upstairs to get a piece of paper and a pen. Then, while being witnessed by the staff, he personally drafted a letter of authorization, signed his name, printed his thumbprint, and stamped the seal. After doing all of this, Klein cast his gaze at the newspaper in Audrey's hand. Is there anything else? I just came back from outside the city. I only heard the paperboy shout that the kingdom has declared war on Saga. Audrey pursed her lips and said with a slightly gloomy expression, not long after the airship fleet from Saga attacked Backlund, their Sonia Sea fleet took advantage of the thick fog to attack the Imperial Navy's base at Pritz Harbor's Oak Island and the shipyards in the surrounding area. Fortunately, the Church of the Lord of Storms received a warning beforehand and sent a telegram in advance. Pritz Harbor wasn't lost, but it lost quite a number of ships and factories. It said that many people died and were seriously injured. This is war, Klein sighed. Can I see how the king declared war? Audrey knew that there was something wrong with King George III, so she could tell that Mr. World was hiding his contempt. She didn't refuse and handed the newspaper over. It was the Tussock Times. Without needing to spread it open, he directly saw the king's declaration on the headlines. 708 years ago, the Phasacians took away Sonia Island from us. A year ago, the Phasacians stole half of our interests in East Balam. Today, they bombarded Backlund and attacked Pritz Harbor. Many Loanese were killed and injured, and their blood has stained the ground. There's no way for us to back down any further. We can only be bullied again and again by the Phasacians if we back off. If we continue retreating, we will lose all our interests overseas. Large amounts of our products will not be sold. Countless workers will lose their jobs, and even more peasants will go bankrupt. Everything from the past and now states that justice is in our hands, and we have enough strength to seize complete victory. Everyone, I, your Emperor, George III, represent the parliament and the kingdom's government to declare war on Fasak. Unless they raise the white flag and surrender, we will never stop advancing. Advance, we shall take back Sonia Island. Advance, we shall conquer St. Milam. Victory will definitely belong to us. The gods will be with us. Klein quickly browsed through it and used his clown ability to stop his lips from curling up. He then returned the tussock times to Audrey. He took off his hat and bowed. I'll leave the rest to you. I will, please rest assured. Audrey held the letter of authorization and newspapers and bowed. Without any further delay, Klein left the Lone Charity Bursary Foundation with his valet, Anuni, and arrived at St. Samuel Cathedral. At that moment, the church no longer had many believers present. Most of them had returned to their homes, busy preparing for their life with war having been declared. In the dark and quiet environment, Klein found a seat and sat down. He took off his hat, clasped his hands, and placed them in front of his mouth and nose. He softly recited the honorific name of the Evernight goddess, then said, I received news from the Red Angel Evil Spirit that it's very likely that Zeratul has already arrived in Backland. As for the secret ruins of the Blood Emperor, there's a high chance that it's the mausoleum needed for the Black Emperor ritual. After the prayer, Klein waited patiently for a while. He saw the Archbishop, Anthony Stevenson, enter from the side door and walk towards him. This saint was clean-shaven. He wore a black robe that had the Crimson Moon's emblem on it. He walked without making a sound, as though he was the night that slowly descended. Anthony didn't say a word after he approached Dwayne Dantes. He only signaled with his eyes before turning towards the library. With that, Klein got up, put on his hat, and followed silently behind. As for his personal servant, Anuni, he held his cane and walked to the entrance of the cathedral to wait. Outside the library, Archbishop Anthony turned around and revealed a smile. He said to Dwayne Dantes, War has erupted. There are too many things that need to be done. As a devout believer of the goddess, are you willing to provide some help? Indeed. From the looks of it, Ma'am Ariana has left Backland. As Klein sighed, he drew the Crimson Moon on his chest. It's my honor. Praise the lady. After responding, he immediately asked, What do you need me to do? I'll inform you when needed. Try not to go home during this period of time, St. Anthony said in an illogical tone. And in an instant, he understood what the other party meant. He had to hide for now. They had no time to deal with Zeratul. At most they could provide him protection within a certain range. Just as I thought, the goddess is digesting the uniqueness of the death pathway. She will not be able to do a divine descent for a long period of time. The upper echelons of the church have to deal with the war, while the negative effects of Grade 0 sealed artifacts are more terrifying than the last. Klein nodded gently. Yes, Your Grace. May the goddess bless you. St. Anthony drew the Crimson Moon. Praise the lady. The only escape is tranquility. Klein responded with a familiar gesture. Then, he left St. Samuel Cathedral and headed to another street with his valet. After walking for a while, both of them disappeared at some point in time. East Borough, in a 2-bedroom rental apartment. Wearing an ordinary face, Klein took out the adventurer's harmonica and blew at it. Soon, Rionette Tynker walked out of the void with 4 blonde, red-eyed heads in hand. She wasn't surprised by her contractor's appearance. Without giving a letter, he directly said, Tell Miss Sharon and Marie that Zeratul has come to Backland and is very likely to be in contact with the Rose School of Thought. They must be careful. It's best not to go to the Bravehearts bar in the near future. Zeratul. This time, Rionette Tynker's 4 heads spoke at the same time, as though they had spent a great deal of effort to recall who it was. Leader of the Secret Order. A Sequence 1 angel who once lost his mind before becoming normal again. Klein took out a gold coin and handed it to Miss Messenger. He didn't mention that Zeratul was very interested in Gehrman Sparrow. He believed that, as a high-level spirit world creature, Miss Messenger would be able to sense his uniqueness to a certain extent. Otherwise, there was no need for this angel to lower Herb's status to be his messenger. If it was for yesterday once more charms, she could provide him help in a more decent manner. As for why Zeratul didn't discover the Grey Fog's aura in the Foggy Town but now shows interest in Gehrman Sparrow, Klein believed that there were 3 reasons. The first reason was that the Grey Fogs beyond a convergence had compelled this powerful seer to come to Backland, and he predicted something. The second reason was that Gehrman Sparrow was able to leave the Foggy Town despite receiving the wrong symbol and return to the real world. The third reason was that Gehrman Sparrow was likely related to the organization that believed in the Fool. By the time Zeratul came into contact with the Rose School of Thought and realized that the Mother Tree of Desire was somewhat interested in Gehrman Sparrow, even if he didn't have a guess, the importance he placed on Gehrman Sparrow would still rise exponentially. Rionette Tinker didn't say anything else. One of the heads tilted forward and bit the gold coin. After watching Miss Messenger leave, he pulled a chair and sat down. He sized up the sky outside the window across a wooden desk. The layout of the rental apartment was the same as the one he used to live in Tinjin City. There was a bedroom inside, and outside of it was a living room, dining room, and study room. There was also a bunk bed. At that moment, in the room, other than him, there were only his marionettes, Konas and Inuni. You're tuning in to the Xueqi's Martial Arts Saga YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.